It hurts so bad. What's going on? Is there really a brain hemorrhage? He should hurry up and wake up. I really don't want to die young. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was his own hands on the desk. His eyes still could not get used to the light. The guy squinted heavily. I had to shake my hands to bring the muscles to life. He couldn't understand why the feeling of being pierced with a knife in his head arose. He would probably need to take the day off for tomorrow. But something was clearly wrong. Looking at one point, the brunette clung to this feeling and tried to remember where he was. An unfamiliar desk with a stack of books and a revolver. The same room he saw for the first time. The guy turned his head sharply. A drop of sweat rolled down his temple. In the window directly in front of the table, a huge red moon, like a balloon, could be seen. She reflected for a moment in frightened eyes. The stranger turned sharply away from the window again. He, walking on stiff legs and heavy boots, approached the mirror. A frightened face looked at the guy. Could it really be him? Called Diaz. Pulling back the collar of his shirt, as if it might help him breathe deeper, he wondered if he could be reborn. The stories I read described something similar. But could this happen to the guy in reality? He had been having a lot of bad luck lately. On his way out of work, he passed by an old bookseller. Strangely, Kyle bought one. It wasn't like him. Following the instructions in the book, the guy placed food in all four corners of the room and performed a ritual to increase luck. After waiting for a while, he threw the book on the bed. Nothing had changed. It was all complete nonsense. And now, Diaz wondered, was he really reborn thanks to that ritual of increasing luck? My temples squeezed like a vice. Another headache. He saw someone else's memories. A little boy sitting on the floor next to a mountain of books. Someone called him. The kid turned around and saw a smiling boy and a puzzled girl. A citizen of the Kingdom of Lone, which is located on the northern continent. He comes from the city of Taigan, Ava County. The parents are beautiful, stately and happy. His father was a sergeant in the Royal Guard, a man who sacrificed himself during the colonial conflict with the southern continent. The benefit paid to his family gave Klein the opportunity to enroll in a private gymnasium. The beloved mother was a fan of the goddess of eternal night. She died the same year that Klein passed his university entrance exams. Now the guy lives in a two-room apartment with his older brother and younger sister. Thanks to his brother, who works as a clerk in an import-export company, the family has money. Klein, as a graduate, understands the ancient language, the proto-language of all the languages of the northern continent. He also knows the language of Hermes, which is associated with prayers, sacrifices, and often appears in ancient tombs. Kyle perked up from thoughts of Hermes's tongue, as if he had just woken up. He rushed to the table on which the notepad lay. Running his finger along the paper, he read that everyone would die, including him. The guy suddenly saw that his fingers became dirty. Taking a closer look, he recognized the substance. Could it really be blood? My whole body broke out in a cold sweat again. There was a pounding in my temples. What could it be? How was it even possible to survive after such a serious injury? Burying his fingers in his hair, he felt a depression on his right temple, a bullet hole. Covering the wound with his hair, he thought that it was already half healed. Diaz stared at himself in the mirror. He was definitely not imagining anything, and he was definitely still alive. Is this really a healing effect caused by rebirth? There was one more issue to be resolved. The guy turned to the window, looking around the table. As he got closer, he thought about how he could survive. Taking the revolver in his hands, he pulled out bullets from the drum. One was missing. Everything fell into place. That's what killed him. On the floor was the same missing person in a pool of blood. But not everything fit into a single puzzle. The brunette brought the bullet to his eyes. Looking closer, is it suicide, or is it still murder? His family was so poor that even buying a gas lamp for the table for his older brother Benson cost a lot of effort. Where did Klein get the revolver? Running his fingers across the surface of the paper once again, he couldn't figure out what the killer's goal was, because it didn't seem like a poor junior history graduate could cause any trouble. Kyle decided to wash his face and splashed some water on his face from the tap to wash away the hot sweat from his forehead and cheeks. It's such a pity that the memories of the original owner of this body are preserved only in fragments, and cannot be pieced together. Having wiped his face, the guy was glad that he finally managed to wash himself, and he would remove the blood from the floor a little later so as not to scare Melissa. The gray pink sky of dawn stretched above the gloomy buildings of the city. Diaz was tossing the revolver in his hand, thinking about something. At that moment the door creaked, and he was called by the name of the owner of the body. Out of fright, he, now being Klein, jumped up and almost dropped his weapon. The sister stood in the doorway, older than in the memories, a beautiful girl with dark hair and big brown eyes. When asked what he was doing, the guy hid the revolver behind his back and grabbed a watch that belonged to his father from the table. The guy blurted out that he wanted to wind the watch, since the hands were no longer moving, while the girl silently, with an incredulous look, looked at her brother. Klein managed to move the desk drawer and put the revolver there. Melissa walked over and held out her hand to the watch. The guy, stuttering, mechanically handed the thing to his sister. The watch slipped from Klein's palm into Melissa's hand. Having opened the lid, she turned around, walking towards the exit, and said that it would be better if she fixed them herself. Melissa Ioretti, the youngest daughter of the Moretti family, 16 years old, was a student at the Tianjin Technical School in the Department of Steam Engines and Mechanisms, and dreamed of becoming a steam mechanic. Kyle watched as the girl manipulated the device with a screwdriver, and thought that she clearly had a talent when it came to mechanical things. A few minutes later, Melissa handed the watch to her brother, who admired the quick repair. The girl looked at her admiring brother, standing at the door. Diaz decided that her gaze was disturbing, as if she thought of her older brother as mentally ill, or something like that. A little later, Melissa placed a teapot and a plate of bread on Klein's desk. She asked Klein to buy more fresh bread, meat, and peas, promising to prepare stewed lamb with peas on the occasion of his upcoming interview. With a stern shake of her finger, Melissa repeated her shopping list several times, insisting on buying some bread since it was hot outside and it would soon go bad. Kyle decided that his sister cared too much about his brother, but if he still went and bought groceries, he could perform another luck-increasing ritual and then be reborn back. Sunlight poured into the room, revealing the dancing dust in the air. The brunette excitedly searched every inch of his bed. Finally, burying herself in the blanket, her hand felt the loss. He froze joyfully in anticipation. He found it. Diaz got out onto the street of an unfamiliar city. The market was noisy, people were hurrying, boots clicking on the stonework. Women in long dresses and hats were looking for something to fill their baskets with. Men in suits looked into every shop. The fishmonger was calling to his place. Fresh fried products smelled appetizing on the counter. At the shop next door, a smiling owner offers fresh oyster soup, guaranteeing that just one serving will give you energy for the whole day. Nearby they advertised vegetables from country farms, fresh and inexpensive. Here you could even hear the music of street musicians. Kyle adjusted his hat and thought that the markets of different worlds were similar to each other in their liveliness. He clutched a few bills in his hand. That's all Benson managed to save. No matter what world he was in, it was damn nice to have money. The guy mistakenly believed that rebirth was guaranteed to make him rich, and now complained that, having been reborn, he still remained poor. Having pulled himself together, he calmed down. He needed to hurry up and buy some food in order to perform the ritual to increase luck and return to his home world. On the threshold of the bakery he was already met by the dear merchant Mrs. Smyrn with a full package freshly baked baguettes. He waved in greeting and asked to sell him some loaves just as his sister had ordered. The woman, packing bread, asked Klein about her brother, whether he had returned yet. The guy replied that Benson would be away longer than usual. The merchant rattled, "His brother is hardworking and will soon find a good wife. And Klein, being a graduate of the history department, will be able to earn money on his own and live in a better apartment." Kyle smiled and thought that petty scraps of memories would definitely not give him an advantage at the interview. He would never agree to go there. He needed to be reborn and return to his past life and friends waiting for him. The woman handed him a bag of bread and told him the cost of the purchase. The guy was puzzled. He asked why it was so expensive, because yesterday bread cost even less, and 2 months ago it was even cheaper. But she smiled and replied that we should be grateful for the repeal of the grain law, and of course, for the people who marched in protest. Diaz left the store, remembering that Melissa said to buy lamb and peas. A cheerful exclamation was heard from a street performer who was walking along the street in clown makeup and inviting everyone to an evening circus performance. He handed Klein the leaflet as he approached. The guy, looking at the program, thought that Melissa would also like it. The only question was the price of the ticket. Suddenly a girl's voice was heard. They called him to tell him about fate. The brunette turned around with interest. A young girl stood at the circus tent, wearing makeup, a cloak and a witch's hat. He has already waved his hand in refusal, but the stranger assured that her tarot cards were extremely accurate. Suddenly Klein realized that her pronunciation was absolutely identical to the earthly one, and yet the tarot cards had their own history. They did not originate from the 7 universally recognized gods, and were not handed down from ancient times. On the contrary, they were invented more than 170 years ago by Rosie Augusta, consul of the Intis Republic. He invented the steam engine, perfected the sailboat, and overthrew the imperial government of the Intis Kingdom. Receiving the calling of the Church of the God of Craftsmanship, he became the first consul of the Intis Republic. He later began his expansion and took control of the Kingdom of Inberg and a number of other countries, brought several kingdoms to their knees, forcing them to submit, and later, having turned the Republic of Intis into an empire, proclaimed himself Emperor Caesar. It was during Rosel's reign that the Church of the God of Craftsmanship received its first public divine revelation since the Fifth Age, and then the God of Craftsmanship was renamed the God of Steam and Machinery. It was Rosal who invented fortune-telling with tarot cards, formed the modern system of paper cards, and did not forget to develop card games. Among them there were those that turned out to be familiar to Kyle. But in the last year of his life he was betrayed. In 1198 of the Fifth Era, the Church of the Ever-Burning Sun with the Sauron family and other families from the former kingdom of Intis killed him, where he died in the palace. Was this Emperor Caesar really Klein's mentor who experienced a similar rebirth? Diaz nevertheless agreed to fortune-telling, especially since the girl promised to tell fortunes at the expense of the establishment. Magician, Emperor, Hangman, Moderation. The guy realized that the cards were no different from earthly ones, and it seemed to him more and more that Roselle was his older comrade in misfortune. Meanwhile the fortune-teller invited him to shuffle and divide the deck. Klein once again made sure that it was free, just in case. He obediently rustled his cards and put them on the table. The fortune-teller pulled the deck towards him and asked what he would like to know about. Diaz, looking at her seriously, replied that it was about the past, present, and future. The girl asked again, and smiling, asked to shuffle the cards again. After all, as she said, you can get a truly reliable prediction only when a person is exactly sure what he wants to ask. Klein was embarrassed, but still complied with the request. When asked if everything was okay now, she nodded in agreement. The fortune-teller took cards from the deck and placed them face down in front of the guy. The first personified the past, the next the present. The last card symbolized the future. She then asked which card the brunette would like to see first. He thought for a moment and asked for the real thing. The fortune-teller nodded and extended her hand to the card. There was a gesture there, a card with the number 0. Klein scratched his chin. This card implies some kind of beginning. What could it mean? Is it really a beginning that is full of endless possibilities? Suddenly, a girl wearing the same clothes as the fortune-teller burst into the tent and began shouting indignantly that she was impersonating her again. The fake fortune-teller giggled, turning to the stranger. She stood with her hands folded on her chest and told the person sitting at the table to remember that she was just a trainer. Then, the real fortune-teller forcibly pushed her colleague out of the tent, reminding her that telling people's destinies was her job. The girl managed to say that predictions are her calling and she simply could not resist. Sometimes her fortune-telling can be very accurate. A real fortune-teller, having made sure that the trainer left, tiredly wiped the sweat from her forehead. Then she turned to Klein and offered to interpret the cards. The guy, blushing, asked if it was free. Hearing that it was not, he immediately became uninterested in his fate. Clutching a bag of hot bread in his hands, Diaz could not understand why the fortune-teller turned out to be an animal trainer, but at least he bought food according to the list from his sister. The guy cradled 2 coins in his palm, all that was left of the original amount. He understood that money was really tight, and also felt sorry for the breadwinner from the family, Brother Benson. Squeezing the coins, he decided not to despair. After all, now he would be able to carry out the ritual of increasing luck. Already at home, sitting at the desk in his room, Klein finished translating the spell. The language of Hermes turned out to be difficult, but he translated the spell into the ancient languages of Fysak and Lone. After that, the brunette placed 1 loaf of bread in the right places. When the products were in place, he decided that he could begin. Klein began to recite a special spell for the ritual. Closing his eyes, he asked the immortal Lord of Heaven and Earth for a blessing. Having uttered the right words for the last time, the guy saw that the space was illuminated with a blue glow. Closing his eyes tightly, he passionately wanted to go back. What if something unexpected happened? He fell to his knees. Incredible pain pierced his temples. as if nails were being driven into his head. Klein found himself on the floor in a fetal position, trying to somehow alleviate the terrifying sensations. He realized that he could not open his eyes, and someone's incessant voice sounded around him. The brunette plunged deeper and deeper into a strange, unknown abyss. Opening his eyes, Klein saw that everything around him was gray. He raised his hand and moved his fingers. The guy stood up and walked forward. Some strange red substances in the form of small balls were floating around him. Something attracted him to these incomprehensible substances, and finally he extended his hand. Unexpectedly for the guy, he felt a strong blow. Taking a step back, he painfully bumped into the balls with his elbow and back. The accumulation of red substances around his body only meant that he would now be transported to unfamiliar places again. Klein cursed when he realized this, but it was too late. In a richly furnished room, there was a mirror on the dressing table. In front of him, a young girl named Audrey Watson, wearing old-fashioned but expensive clothes, closed her eyes and folded her hands in a prayerful gesture, whispering fervently, asking someone to wake up. She waited a few more seconds, but nothing happened. Audrey made an upset expression on her face. After all, her father had deceived her. She turned away from the mirror in disappointment. My father said that this mirror once belonged to the Dark Emperor of the ancient Empire of Solomon, and that it was some kind of unusual treasure. But something changed. Some sounds were heard from the direction of the mirror. The girl turned around interestedly and leaned on the table. Her mouth opened slightly in silent surprise, and her eyes widened. Really? In the raging big water, on huge waves, the ship maneuvered with all sails. A man, Alger Wilson, stood on the deck, holding a large white crystal in his hands, his cloak fluttering in different directions from the wind. He told himself that they were still missing the ghost shark's blood. Suddenly, the surface of the crystal glowed pinkish. At that moment, the entire ship was engulfed in a similar, blinding glow. Meanwhile, Kyle was still reeling from the sudden move. In the vast space, he saw two silhouettes in the distance. Audrey Watson and Alger Wilson looked at the guy in bewilderment, asking what kind of place this was. The brunette could not answer them. He also did not understand where he was, but managed to understand that the strangers were speaking his language. Were these people thrown into a strange place because of his luck-enhancing ritual? If this is indeed the case, then instead of revealing himself, the guy could clarify the situation and find out interesting information. Diaz smiled. In any case, it was just an experiment. The strangers opened their eyes. An experiment. Both couldn't see each other or Kyle, so they were now completely disoriented. Audrey clutched the frills of her dress in concern. She asked if the experiment was successful and if they could now return. Diaz realized that the fog in space was gradually dissipating. He saw a blonde girl and a man with blue hair. He still can't see them all. Does that mean it's his strength? But the guy knew something for sure. In the current situation, they are guests, and he is the owner. Kyle decided not to tell the whole truth. He spread his arms wide and said that if the strangers officially asked him, he could return them. Audrey decided that the guy had no bad intentions and smiled. What an amazing experiment. She beamed. The girl had always hoped that she could experience something like this, and she liked secrets, and all sorts of supernatural miracles. She asked Diaz what she needed to do to become otherworldly, but he smiled awkwardly. He didn't know himself. The guy thought, if he is the master of this world, is it decent of him to just stand and answer questions? In this case, there should be a temple, or a long table at which he could sit while the guests asked their questions. At that moment, the ground beneath them began to crack like ice, crumbling into fragments. The strangers were frozen in fear and surprise. The trio found themselves in a new place. An architectural ensemble of tall buildings and towers surrounded them on all sides. They sat at a long table, Kyle at the head exactly as he had wished earlier. Audrey looked around with admiration. How amazing it all was. Algeria turned to her. He said that if a girl wants to become otherworldly, she should join the Church of the Goddess of Eternal Night, the Church of the Lord of Storms, or the Church of the God of Steam and Machines. But the vast majority of people, even in their entire lives, will not be able to meet the otherworldly. Thus, even many clergy of the largest temples are forced to doubt all this. He continued that even if this is so, the man is sure that there are still otherworldly people in the palace, in the courts, in the executive bodies, only, with the beginning of the Iron Age, their numbers greatly decreased. Kyle thought, the Iron Age, based on Klein's memories, the Iron Age referred to this era, which was called the Fifth Age, and began 1,349 years ago. Audrey spoke up. She already knew about this. Then more, she was aware of the Nighthawks, the authorized punisher and the collective mind mechanism, and besides, the girl does not want to lose her freedom. Wilson noted that it has not yet happened that one can become otherworldly without sacrificing anything. If Audrey does not want to join the churches and accept their laws, she can only turn to the royal family or aristocrats. Otherwise, she can rely on her luck in searching for secret dark organizations. The girl frowned. Is there really no other way? The man thought about the question. He raised his head and looked somewhere into the distance. Kyle stretched out like a string from this look. Finally, Algeria spoke. He had 2 sets of potion formulas in 9 sequences. When Audrey asked again, the man replied that she should know what it was about. If she wanted to become otherworldly, she would have to rely on potions whose names come from the blasphemous tablet. The names of potions have been translated into many languages and they have changed greatly over time. The names are always changed to suit the particularities of the current era. But more importantly, the point is not in the names, but in what effects these potions provide. One such potion that Algeria possesses is called Sailor, which gives a great sense of balance, even while on a ship during a storm. A person will receive enormous strength and illusory scales over the skin. It will allow the drinker to swim like a fish and move underwater as deftly as sea animals. In the past, the potion was called Guardian of the Sea. The second set of potions is called Spectator. Alger said that he does not know what it was called in the past, but it will allow you to gain an exceptionally sharp mind and excellent observational abilities. Like a spectator, following the behavior and emotions of the actors, one will be able to sneak a peek into their secret thoughts. It's like a spectator watching a play, but whether you're at an extravagant banquet or in the middle of the street, you have to remember that a spectator is always a spectator. Audrey said with admiration that she had already fallen in love with this spectator potion, and wanted to get its formula. Could Algeria exchange it for anything? The man replied that he needed at least 100 milliliters of the ghost shark's blood. Audrey leaned forward. If she could get the blood, then how would she give it? And would they give her the real potion? To which Wilson replied that he would give her his address, send the package by mail. Otherwise it would be delivered right here. The man said that, regarding guarantees, he and the girl would feel calm if Kyle, whom he called the mysterious gentleman, became the driver of the deal. Audrey exclaimed contentedly, turning to the guy that he could really witness the deal. When asked how he could be addressed, Diaz could not immediately answer. But later, one thought came to his mind. The guy said that he could be called the Jester. Audrey and Algeria looked at each other. The girl immediately accepted the terms of the game. She left the table, curtsied and pompously asked Mr. Jester to become the guarantor of their deal with Algeria. Kyle agreed. Then Algeria also rose and bowed, saying that they would consider it an honor to have his patronage. Diaz asked to continue, and he wondered if his behavior went beyond his current status. The man said that when Audrey gets the blood of the ghostly shark, she should ask him to bring it to the Warrior and Sea Bar on Pelican Street, in the White Roses area in Pritz Harbor. For William, this is exactly what the captain was looking for. As soon as it is in Wilson's hands, the formula will be immediately sent by mail. Or you can make a deed of transfer here at the next meeting. Audrey agreed to the meeting. She turned to Kyle and asked him to conduct a similar experiment again. The girl thought that since he agreed to act as a witness to the transaction, such meetings would be held regularly. Algeria asked the same question. He praised the Jester's strength, and said that he and Audrey could offer him their knowledge, connections and resources. Hall was surprised that the pirate figured out that she was an aristocrat so quickly. She picked up Algeria's thought, and also said that the guy could transfer any tasks he didn't like to them. Kyle thought that such meetings would help him learn more about the otherworldly and other hidden secrets. This knowledge would help him in his quest for reverse rebirth. And he would also have time to learn the recipe for the spectator potion. But we should not forget that such frequent meetings can reveal his personality. Diaz tapped his finger on the table irritably. Then, he decided and replied to the couple that he would make sure to reward them for any help they provided. Audrey was glad that the Jester agreed and suggested that they all choose code names. If the guy was a Jester, that is, he personified one of the tarot cards. To maintain secrecy, you need to choose names from one source. Hall decided she would be Justice. Algeria decided that he would be the Hangman. The girl noticed that since their nicknames were taken from a deck of cards, it would be better to call them Tarot Club Meetings from the meeting. In this way they could even attract new members to the society. to which Kyle replied that they could solve these issues without his participation. Audrey said she heard that tarot cards were invented by Emperor Roselle as a form of entertainment, and asked if they had the power to predict the future. Kyle replied that no, in most cases, fortune-telling comes from one's own ego, because every person has some kind of spirituality. Just like everyone is able to penetrate into this wonderful world of their own subconscious and recognize themselves from a different side, but ordinary people are not able to do this, much less interpret various signs of fate, tying them to their lives. This information can be provided to them through fortune-telling, for example, through dreams and their interpretation. Tarot cards are the same tool, thanks to their symbols and logical elements. They help explain these signs. Kyle rubbed his temple. His head began to hurt again. Audrey, meanwhile, began to talk about another set of cards from Emperor Roselle, which symbolized special power. At first there were 22 cards, and on their basis, the cards of the senior tarot deck were already created. Diaz thought that his growing headache would soon make it impossible for him to maintain contact with this world. Algiers agreed with Audrey's reasoning. Emperor Roselle personally saw the blasphemous tablet, and a set of paper maps contained the deep secrets of the 22 paths of divine providence. Kyle's voice was heard. He said that it was time to end their meeting today. Audrey rose gracefully from the table. She bowed down. As you wish, sir. The building began to dissolve into space. Their next meeting would not be long in coming. Kyle was transported back to the city. He stood confused in the middle of the room, and it seemed as if everything that was happening was a dream. The guy still couldn't understand what the gray foggy world was. He leaned his hands on the table. What kind of force was it that caused all the incidents? There was a pocket watch on the table. Apparently, in that world, time flowed at the same pace. Nevertheless, this meeting turned out to be truly fascinating. Diaz thought that his new acquaintances lived in different parts of the world and were still able to communicate. But it sounded familiar, like modern messengers in his world. The brunette sat down at the table, opened his notebook and thought, apparently, he would not be returning to Earth in the near future. From that moment on, Kyle no longer existed, only Klein remained. Meanwhile, the huge ships sailed on the stormy waves. Algeria seemed to wake up from a dream, suddenly opening his eyes. He stood there, clutching his crystal in his hand. Suddenly the gem began to crack, and in the end it fell into pieces right in front of the amazed man. He looked at his palm in shock. The next moment, the silhouette of a large snowflake was imprinted directly on her. Wilson walked down to the cabins with a decisive step. At the entrance, he looked up at the approaching man. They both passed each other abruptly, but still slowed down for a moment. They greeted with a special greeting, placing their fist to their chest. May the storm be with us. The corridor with a beautiful, expensive interior was illuminated by candlesticks. Algeria stood in the captain's office while he loudly shouted, sitting at the table, that he would never give up his own. Wilson calmly replied that he was confident of his captain's victory. The boss wanted to say something, but he was unable to continue his thought. The next moment, Algeria flew up sharply and grabbed the captain by the throat. Passing the table, the pirate, still clutching the man with one hand, slammed him into the wall, which began to crack from the impact. The captain's wheeze was heard. His eyes rolled back. The air slowly left his lungs. Finally, blood gushed from the mouth, which, as it flowed down, turned out to be a puddle that spread on the floor. A few minutes later, the lifeless body of the captain was thrown overboard into the raging water through a hole in the cabin. Algeria calmly wiped the blood from his clothes with a handkerchief. One of the sailors burst into the cabin, asking what happened, to which Wilson replied that he did not know that the captain still had otherworldly abilities, so he ran away. He also said that the captain was a minor figure. They would still be rewarded for finding the ghostly tutor's ship. The broken wall began to repair itself. Algeria watched this, and noticed that if the storm continued, the captain would not be able to hold out for long. His gaze was full of determination. A new era is coming. A little explanation from the author. In the old days, the sailor potion was called Guardian of the Seas. It is related to the path that the Church of the Lord of Storms preaches, and also gives an excellent sense of balance, especially during a storm. You can also get illusory scales. It will be difficult to catch you in the water, but in bad weather conditions you should not go into the ocean at night. Audrey Watson sat in front of the shards of a broken mirror, a circle of red dots on her palm. She rubbed her eyes. She woke up, and that meant it wasn't a dream after all. The girl smiled at her thoughts. Lifting the fabric of the top layer of the dress with her fingers, she danced around the room. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Watson stopped dead in her tracks. When asked who it was, a girl's voice was heard from behind the door. It was Annie, her maid. She asked if she could enter the room. Having received consent, the girl opened the door. Audrey, putting a sweet smile on her face, asked what happened. Annie said her lady needed to get ready. Suddenly her gaze moved to the fragments all over the floor. The girl immediately realized that the mirror standing on her owner's dressing table had broken. Audrey decided to blame it on her dog Susie. Annie knew how much she loved to wreak havoc. The maid, collecting the fragments with napkins, noticed that the mistress should train Susie better. A few minutes later, Audrey was already sitting at the dressing table in front of a large mirror. Annie asked what dress she would like to wear. The girl replied that she would not refuse the one Miss Guinea gave her for her 17th birthday. Annie sternly noted that the dress could not be worn twice for an official ceremony. This could expose the Watson family to gossip about her financial status. Audrey protested. She really liked the dress, but the maid advised her to wear the outfit at home or for less formal meetings. Then Miss Watson decided to wear her recent gift from Mr. Sada's, a dress with a lotus pattern on the sleeve. Finally, with the help of two maids, Audrey was ready to go. There was a knock on the door, then a stately man came in. He called the girl the brightest pearl of Backland, and said that it was time for them to hit the road. Audrey immediately capriciously asked her father not to call her that. The man obediently agreed and raised his left hand so that his daughter could walk next to him. It was time for him and the little princess to go out. The girl immediately protested. She wanted to be on the right. The left side was intended for her mother Miss Watson, the Countess. She could not take her place, to which her father agreed. They were to visit Pritz Harbor, Oak Island, the base of the Royal Navy. The carriage with the Watson family arrived at the place. The father gallantly shook his hand with his daughter as she exited. The girl looked around and was amazed at what she saw. Huge towers from which smoke erupted. A fleet with incredible cannons. The fleet was truly impressive. Audrey, clinging to her father, turned her head, exactly like the rest of the crowd. Finally, the girl stopped dead in front of an armored military ship. In the clear sky above the ships, a huge airship flew noisily. Absolutely every person in the crowd looked in admiration at the miracle of technology, holding their head high. The car still slowly continued its journey high in the sky. Audrey recognized it immediately. It was the royal airship. Finally, it sank to the water in front of the deck, and the workers threw away the ladder. They stood in an even line in front of the airship like soldiers in uniform. So are the real knights in armor with swords. Now the crowd could see the ruler of the kingdom of Lone George III with his retinue. Hall thought that in the age of iron and guns, someone else would wear a full suit of armor. Were there really punishment paladins of the highest order? The Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Lone, Aguizan Nigan, spoke and loudly announced a historical moment: the construction of the first warship. Its length is 101 meters, its width is 21. It has a unique design, armor with a thickness of 47 millimeters, a total displacement of 10,060 tons. The man also spoke about the main battery, its components, and the weapons in the latter. He shouted loudly to the crowd, "This ship will become a hegemon, a conqueror of the seas." The man turned to the ruler. He bowed and asked George to name the ship. He noted that since the ship sails from the harbor of Pritz Harbor, then it can be called Pritz. On this occasion, fireworks rang out in the air, and the crowd joyfully chanted the name of the ship. The minister said that from now on, the 7 pirates who called themselves admirals and the 4 pirates who proclaimed themselves kings can only wait in fear of their death. Their era is coming to an end, and nothing can help them. Some daredevil from the crowd shouted that the pirates themselves could build similar machines. His idea was picked up. Can't they really build their own? And what to do if the pirates receive the same battleships? Aguizad began to reassure the crowd. This is impossible. The construction of such a ship required enormous costs, human resources, 2 royal shipyards and 100 factories, the efforts of the Admiralty and ministers, as well as the king and a great country. Pirates will never achieve something like this. The man again proclaimed that from now on the era of firearms and giant warships begins. Kyle was still sitting in his room at the table in front of his notebook. He looked at the back of his hand, for dots were visible there. Were they really disappearing? 4 spots form a square. Do they correspond to 4 products located in different corners of the room? He may no longer need to prepare for the ritual. but the lack of understanding of what is happening makes the guy feel uneasy. He collapsed on the bed, exhausted. Fear is the most ancient and powerful human emotion, and fear of the unknown is the most powerful and ancient type of fear. The brunette closed his eyes, falling into sleep. Some time passed, and he woke up. Rubbing his eyes, Diaz thought that his sleep was not bad, and even his head stopped hurting so much. Looking at his watch, he saw that he had slept for 3 hours. Time flows here at approximately the same speed as on Earth. But the guy was not sure that the passage of time was still the same. Suddenly my stomach growled loudly from hunger. Near the table on a plate lay a loaf of bread, the same one that Kyle used for the ritual. He picked up the vessel and thought, is this really the life he will have to live, eating rye bread for breakfast, for lunch, and only occasionally meat? He looked at the stove and grinned. It was time to demonstrate the true power of the reborn. The brunette washed the vegetables under running water. He lit a large cooking fire on the stove and began to work magic on the dish. Finally, he finished. On the table there was a large dish with a good selection of food. He blew on the boiled potatoes and bit into them with his teeth. The taste immediately brought back memories of home. Kyle smiled and began to eat the way he always ate potatoes as a child. The soup turned out so delicious, he even drank the soup right from the plate. The guy put the empty dishes on the table with a knock. He leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. The brunette felt alive again, since performing the ritual would consume a huge amount of energy. Sitting at the table, Kyle decided to get serious about current affairs. He was thinking that now, after rebirth, he was unlikely to be able to return. The main thing now was to find a way to become the otherworldly that Justice and the Hangman were talking about. Luckily, Klein kept a diary. It's worth looking for clues before the next meeting. It was also necessary to deal with the problem of Klein himself, why he committed suicide and what actually happened. The entry from the 29th of May read, Welch found Klein and said that he had acquired the manuscript of the Fourth Era. He did not want to ask for help from the students of the archaeological faculty, so he came to him and Naya asking for help in deciphering. Klein could not refuse, but still postponed its up to release. Kyle thought that, judging by the recollections of the owner of the diary, the Fourth Era was the Iron Age, which came immediately after the Fourth Era. The Fourth Era is indeed very mysterious. Even historians must rely on the annals of the most important churches to even approximately understand what happened in that age. While only the Solomon Empire, the Tudor dynasty, and the Transoest Empire are known to exist, Klein, a history student, was clearly excited by the information about the Age of the Gods. Suddenly it occurred to Kyle that maybe the information that Klein had discovered could be related to his death. The brunette decided to look through the diary to find at least some more clues. Entry from the 24th of June. Naya says that they found something new. It's worth going and looking. Entry from the 25th of June. The owner of the manuscript decided to climb to the top of the Hornisus Ridge, where the people of Eternal Night lived. Then followed a very short entry from the 26th of June, and with that the entries in the diary were uploaded. If Diaz was reborn here on the 28th at midnight, then Klein must have written the next entry on the 27th of June. This entry said that everyone would die, including Klein himself. Kyle closed the diary. After everything he had learned, it seemed Klein didn't need to worry about finding a job. In that world, in that era, universities were few and far between, and only nobles and aristocrats studied there. For example, Welch, he is the son of a wealthy banker. He was in the same group as Klein and Naya, and he often came to them for help. Kyle got the idea that he should visit Welch and take another look at the manuscript. Maybe he could find more clues. He should be careful. If there is anything in the manuscript that is related to him, he will be in great danger if he goes. If the guy decides to run away, then this issue will never be resolved. But he also will not be able to go to the police and write a statement about his own suicide. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, which caught Kyle by surprise. He got up from the table and walked to the door, loudly asking who it was. The knocking continued to echo down the corridor. There was no answer, so Diaz, without turning around, retreated to the table and reached for his revolver. He, trying to do it unnoticed, took it out of the desk drawer. The knocking stopped, but the person standing behind the door did not respond. Kyle was noticeably nervous and asked again who it was. The guy squeezed the revolver tightly, clicking the shutter. A man's voice was heard. It was Mountbatten, bitch Mountbatten. Diaz realized that these were police people. He shouted that he was coming, and meanwhile he himself was wondering where to hide the revolver. The choice fell on the fireplace. he buried the gun in the coal. Then the guy went to the mirror to clean himself up. The mirror reflected a fireplace with a stove. It should work. The guy clicked the door handle to let the police in. He yawned artificially, saying that he fell asleep. Imagine his surprise when he saw a whole company on his doorstep. There were at least 4 policemen standing there. One of them said that 3 inspectors wanted to ask Klein something. He stepped back from the door and motioned for them to enter. Kyle, meanwhile, turned his attention to the policemen's shoulder straps. 6 stars. So those 3 really were inspectors. They didn't hesitate and immediately asked if the brunette knew Welch McGovern. The guy, nervous, immediately asked if anything had happened to him, but the inspector interrupted him. He asked the owner of the room not to worry. Smiling good-naturedly, he said that this was standard procedure. Kyle exhaled shakily, embarrassed. He said that if the inspector was referring to Welch McGovern of Constant, a graduate of Hoy University, then yes, he knew him, since they were classmates and studied under the same mentor, Senior Associate Professor Quentin Cohen. The inspector, hearing this, thought for a moment. Kyle continued, they had been seeing each other often lately, including with Naya, studying a document about the 4th era that belonged to him. The inspector frowned when asked what happened to Klein's friend. The man looked at the brunette sympathetically and said that he was sorry and that Mr. Welch had passed away. Diaz stared at the policeman in shock. How could this happen? He immediately asked about Naya. He was told that the girl also died. She and Welch were found in his house. The brunette asked if they were killed. The inspector shook his head. Evidence from the scene suggests it was a suicide. Welch hit his head against the wall, judging by the amount of blood, multiple times. Miss Naya drowned herself in the sink, the same one in which one usually washes oneself. Kyle, as Ifensing, repeated that this was impossible. The police said that they also thought so initially. Autopsy results and the situation at the crime scene rule out drugs or external force, and there were no signs of struggle on the bodies. The inspectors looked at each other and nodded to each other. One of them asked when Klein last saw Mr. Welch and Miss Naya, and he replied that on the 26th of July they were studying a new chapter of the manuscript. After this, he went home to prepare for the interview, which will take place on the 3rd of June at the Faculty of History of the University of Tianjin. Suddenly, Kyle saw one of the inspector's hand reaching for the diary on the table. He forgot to hide the notes. The inspector was already very close to the diary. Diaz couldn't help but scream. While one inspector examined the notebook, the second told the owner of the room not to worry. This was part of the necessary procedures. The guy gritted his teeth. The police did not even provide a search warrant, and in general, the legal system of the Kingdom of Loan was not developed enough for searches, and even the police themselves were created only 15 to 16 years ago. The inspector asked what was written in the diary. He lifted the notebook up to the same page. The inscription, which he did not understand, said that everyone would die. Kyle wondered what he should do now, whether he should lie to settle everything, but he should definitely enlist the help of the police for the future. The guy rubbed his forehead, as if he was painfully remembering something. He said he didn't know, that when he woke up, he felt as if something was wrong, as if he had forgotten something important, and didn't even understand why he wrote that entry. The brunette opened one eye. At such moments it is best to be frank and careful. But will the police believe him? The policeman got angry. He shouted that this was nonsense, and the guy considered them idiots, was lying about his amnesia, and one could rather believe that he had lost his mind. The brunette began to assure that he was telling the truth, but the inspector interrupted him. The other man smiled conciliatorily and said that maybe Klein was telling the truth. An expert in this matter would soon visit him, and he could help restore his lost memories. Kyle was surprised that they believed him. And what kind of expert was this who would help him? A psychologist. Suddenly the brunette thought about what he would do if his memories of the Earth were discovered. The inspector will thank Diaz for his cooperation and advise him not to leave Tianjin in the coming days. If he needs to leave, he needs to warn Inspector Mountbatten about this, otherwise the guy will be convicted of breaking the law. The brunette nodded. He understood everything. Was that really it? Weren't they going to ask more questions or investigate further or take him to the police station and try to extract information? The long-haired inspector noticed that Klein was very lucky. He explained that people who encounter something like this die, and that they are happy to see the brunette alive. Kyle closed the door behind the police and leaned against the door. He decided to do one more trick to be more convincing. Since everything is so bad, why didn't they offer such an important witness protection, Were they just testing him, or using him as bait? The guy ran out into the corridor and shouted to the police, "They will protect him, won't they?" When they turned the corner of the corridor, he shouted after them again. Then I thought that this is exactly how a normal person would react to all this, right? Looking out the window, he was convinced that the police had left. Then he crawled under the bed and felt around with his hand. Finding a place directly under the bed, he secured the revolver to its inner frame. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he thought that now all he had to do was wait for Melissa to return and prepare the lamb stew with tender peas. Her food was actually quite primitive and simple. The dishes were without seasoning. If Kyle waited for her sister to come home, it would be 7:30 before the food was ready, and the girl would be hungry the entire time. The guy rolled up his sleeves. It's time to show Melissa real cooking, and Klein's talent regarding the emerging talent for cooking. He will explain that this is thanks to Welch. Diaz began chopping the onion with a large knife. Then I threw chopped vegetables into the semi-finished broth. As the guy bent over the pan, Melissa looked into the room. The brunette beamed, delighted to see his sister, and handed her a bowl of soup. There was another portion with a steaming dish on the table. The girl asked in surprise if he had really prepared all this. Kyle said yes and suggested she try it when they both sat down at the table. The girl hesitantly extended the device to the bowl. I carefully took a bite of the beef, eyes widened in admiration. Melissa showered Klein with compliments. It was so tasty, pleasant, and delightful. Every now and then she wielded a fork with one hand, and held the bread in the other. Having put a piece of beef on her fork, she noticed her brother looking at her contentedly, but not eating anything. She stammered and said that Klein had cooked it for himself, but he replied that he had eaten enough while he was cooking. This is a privilege available only to the chef. Melissa praised her brother's cooking, and he replied that he learned the recipe at Welch's house from his personal chef. The guy smiled. His food was not as tasty as the cook's, and promised that he would take Melissa and Benson to a restaurant and treat them to delicious dishes. Melissa wanted to talk to her brother about the interview, but then I hiccuped loudly from the large amount I had eaten. Klein laughed at what he heard. He placed dirty dishes next to him, and asked his sister to wash them. She jumped out from the table and readily agreed to do this. Finally, all the plates and cutlery were sparkling clean. Melissa opened the cupboard to put some clean dishes in it, but I saw new jars of seasonings. She asked her brother if he used black pepper and lard, and he replied that just a little, to which the girl suggested that Klein concentrate on finding a job, and she would take over the cooking. He smiled sheepishly. Was it really necessary to remind him of this right now? Night fell on the city, and the big red moon shone in the sky again. Melissa, leaving her brother's room, asked him not to stay up late. As she left, she turned off the light in the large lamp. Kyle went to bed, but was soon awakened by a loud knock on the door. He sat up in bed, disoriented, and thought it was already morning. A voice was heard from the door, calling himself Dunn Smith. The guy yawned, not remembering such a name. The brunette opened the door. A gray-haired policeman stood on the threshold. Kyle asked what happened. He replied that the police found the coachman, who confirmed that on the 27th, the day of the death of Mr. Welch and Miss Naya, Klein came to Welch's residence, and it was he who helped pay for the guy's carriage. Diaz jumped up. Everything was as he had expected. On the 27th the real Klein was with Welch, and after returning home he committed suicide, just like Welch and Naya. The guy didn't know what to say. He said that this was strong evidence of his involvement in the deaths of Welch and Naya, and that he also wanted to know what happened that day and what exactly happened to his friends. But he really had nothing to add. The guy didn't remember what he was doing on the 27th. Only thanks to the fact that he kept a diary, he could hardly guess that he could have been at Welch's residence on the 27th. The inspector noticed that the brunette had good self-control, but despite this, a drop of sweat ran down Kyle's face from the tension. He, with his arms outstretched, assured that everything that was said was true, but he thought that this was only part of the truth. Dunn Smith, with his back to him, said one of Mr. Welch's revolvers was never found. Suddenly the man turned around and confidently said that he could find a weapon here. Diaz froze. Was it Welch's gun? He immediately raised his hands up. The brunette decided not to lie. He immediately admitted that the revolver was under the bed, fixed to the inner frame. Finally, the policeman, holding a revolver in his hands, turned to Kautz. Won't he say anything to this? He stepped forward. He will tell everything right away. 2 days ago, Klein woke up in the middle of the night and realized that he was sitting reclining on the table, a revolver next to him, and a used bullet lying in the corner of the room as if he was trying to commit suicide. Perhaps the guy was confused, but the bullet did not reach its target. It became clear to him that he did not remember anything, and the events of the 27th too. Kyle thought that maybe he remembered vaguely, but given the rebirths, he confessed to everything. Dunsmith folded his arms on his chest. The story of his suspect coincides with what they have already found out. It also fits into the logic of similar events that happened in the past. But the man absolutely does not understand how the guy managed to survive. Klein exhaled with relief. He was glad that they believed him. He himself did not understand how he managed to survive. The brunette's eyes widened when he heard the policeman speak. He said that it doesn't matter at all that he believes Klein. He is still under great suspicion. They need an expert who will confirm his words. The police need to make sure that Klein really knew about what happened and that he not involved in the deaths of Mr. Welch and Ms. Nye. Dunn extended his hand to the guy and asked him to go to the police station with him and assist in the investigation, which could take 2 or 3 days. The brunette asked if the expert was here, because according to the policeman, this could take up to 2 days. He was told that the expert returned earlier than everyone expected. Klein asked permission to leave a note, and sitting at the table, he thought what would happen to him if the expert found out about the rebirth, because Emperor Roselle was killed by mercenaries right under the noses of the 7 main churches. All this, together with his rebirth, could lead to the tribunal. Klein has no weapons, no fighting skills, and no idea how many police officers are waiting for him outside. If they use weapons, he's finished. The guy left a note on the table for Melissa and picked up the key. Finally, both went out into the street, where the carriage was already waiting for them. The policeman motioned for Kyle to sit down. Not far from them, voices were heard, to which everyone was distracted. According to the passerby, who scolded the street boy, he stole something from him, but the boy zealously resisted. The horse almost reared up from the loud sounds. This was Diaz's chance. He took off and ran. After all, if the brunette succeeds, he won't have to meet with an expert. Passers-by shouted, vying with each other, drawing attention to the fugitive, and he thought that after escaping he would go to Backland. Indeed, there are more people in Backland, and it will be easier to hide there. Running down the street, he noticed empty carriages. Kyle ran up to one and decided to jump in to throw the police off the scent a little. The guy shouted to the coachman to take him to the pier at the edge of the city as soon as possible. The horse moved forward, beating a rhythm on the paving stones with its hooves. The guy exhaled with relief. But something was wrong. The coachman was driving the horse the wrong way. The brunette asked worriedly where they were taking him, to which the coachman replied that he was going to the Welch residence, and turned around. Underneath the wide-brimmed hat was none other than Dunsmith. Kyle sat up abruptly in bed, breathing heavily. Looking out the window, he saw his companion the Red Moon, and realized that it was just a dream. The brunette looked at his watch. It was only 3:30 in the morning. He opened the door to the common corridor. He urgently needed to wash his face, but an unpleasant surprise awaited him there. Dunsmith stood at the moonlit window. The man turned around at the same moment, and looked Klein straight in the eyes. He walked up to the guy, standing right next to him. Kyle swallowed nervously. Was he still sleeping? The policeman raised his hat and asked for formal permission to introduce himself again. He took off his headdress and smiled. Dunsmith, Nighthawk. Diaz opened his mouth in surprise. Black Hawk. It was they who were mentioned by Justice and Hangman, a group of otherworldly people from the Church of the Goddess of Eternal Night. When asked by Klein whether he controlled his sleep, the man replied that he only adjusted it a little. The policeman said that in dreams, most of the repressed human emotions and dark thoughts become stronger, and everything becomes crazy and chaotic. But even the most deeply hidden truth can be found. But if we compare Klein conscious or sleeping, then Dunn will be trusted more by the one who is sleeping. Ordinary people are not able to control their dreams. If Kyle dreams about his life on Earth, then the policeman will definitely find it out. The guy suddenly realized that just in the dream his head was clear. He understood what he could talk about and what he couldn't. This means that Smith saw only what they wanted to show him. Suddenly, because of the rebirth, there is something special in the guy's mental state. Or maybe these are the consequences of the luck-increasing ritual. Diaz turned to the policeman. Now he is sure that he has no memories left. The man said nothing to this, but the next moment he noticed that Klein was not at all shocked by what had happened, because the people he had met earlier, even after returning from sleep, refused to believe in the power of the otherworldly, preferring to think that they were still in a dream. Kyle said that might be the case, but I hope Nighthawk's powers can help him. Dunn wondered, maybe Klein was able to survive not only because he was lucky. The man can now confirm that the guy lost some of his memories due to this incident, especially the accompanying memories, to which the brunette asked if he could return home. Nighthawk responded with a flat refusal. Klein would still need to go with him and meet with the expert. The brunette jumped up, but why? He thought what would happen if the expert knew about hypnosis or mind reading and the fact of his rebirth was revealed, but he asked the policeman out loud if he was really not sure about what he had seen in his dream. The man was confident about dreams, but it never hurts to double-check such important information. Kyle was surprised when he heard that the Hawks specialize in different areas. Perhaps they will help restore some of the guy's memories, and the expert will help him remember the current location of the manuscript that he is so worried about, the Antigonus family manuscript. The Hawks still haven't found the Fourth Age manuscript, even after searching everything in Mr. Welch's house. Welch was dead, Nia was dead, and now Klein was supposedly the only lead. Kyle did not even know that the manuscript was missing. Until that moment, he had not thought at all about the location of the Fourth Era manuscript. The policeman turned. They needed to leave to get to the Welch residence, where an expert would be waiting for them. The guy wanted to escape, but the otherworldly is much stronger than an ordinary person, and after what happened in his dream, it will be more convincing. Plus, the cop definitely has a gun. Sitting in the carriage, Dunn asked why Klein tried to escape at the end of the dream. He replied that due to the lack of memories, he could have turned out to be a criminal and was simply scared. He also wanted to start a new life on the young continent. Hawk replied that he would have done the same. Kyle asked Mr. Smith if the expert confirmed that he was missing parts of his memories, and there was no evidence pointing to his guilt. Would everything be over? The man replied that theoretically, yes. But they will continue to look for the manuscripts, and they must make sure that Klein has not been cursed, and that there are no evil spirits in his body that could harm those around him and Klein himself. The guy asked if there was anything that violated this order. The policeman said that they were dealing with a case related to a cult. Followers were forced to sacrifice themselves through suicide. One of the victims told the police about everything. Then the case was quickly solved, and there was nothing left on the person. Demonic traces. Dunn added that this man had a happy life, a great family. But in March of this year this man died. He hanged himself in his office. Kyle was shocked. How did this happen? The horse stopped, followed by the carriage. Dunn Smith was the first to leave the carriage and invited his companion to go to the Welch residence. It was a luxurious mansion with several floors and massive columns. As they walked through the corridors of the house, the policeman decided to tell Klein about the expert in the ordinary world. The expert is the most famous spiritual medium in Alwa County. But this is just a disguise. When the brunette asked what her true identity was, Dunn Smith pulled the door handle. In the room, on the sofa, sat a stately, beautiful dark-haired woman in a dress and black stockings, a true spiritual medium. She smiled cordially and greeted the gentleman who entered. When everyone sat down in the free chairs, Dunn asked the medium, whose name was Daly, if she had managed to find out anything. She replied that the souls of Welch and Nia had already disappeared. The man sighed. How complicated everything is. He pointed to the sitting brunette and introduced him, also saying that maybe Daly could find out something with his help. The woman turned and looked closely at Klein. He rested his hands on his knees so that they would not shake too much, and thought about what would happen if the medium revealed his secrets. He had absolutely nothing to hope for in this situation, only that there was something special about him. Daly extended her hand, which contained test tubes with some liquids. She said that she needed a little help with her work, and since the guy was not their enemy, she would not be harsh and rude. But he could still be uncomfortable and hurt. There may even be consequences in the future. Like a fox, smiling, she said that she would give the guest to inhale aromas that would provide calmness and ease for gradual relaxation. This way a person can completely immerse himself in these feelings. Diaz became even more nervous. These words seemed a little strange to him. Nighthawk grinned and said that Klein should not be scared, because they are different from the Church of the Storm Lord and that here the ladies can tease a man. And the guy clearly shares their point of view. Just like how his mother was a follower of the goddess of eternal night, and her children attended Sunday school. Diaz, embarrassed, replied that he did, but it was still incomprehensible to him. Dunn Smith spoke again, urging the guest not to worry, since Daly just wanted to help him relax. In response to his remark that she was more interested in corpses than men, the woman joked that he was making her look like a pervert. The medium poured liquid from one flask onto the candle. It was an herbal distillate made from a mixture of night vanilla, slumber flower and chamomile extract. According to her, the aroma was simply amazing. Then, under a puzzled look, Diaz added a second flask, the Eye of the Spirit, which is made from bark and leaves collected from polar and dragged trees, dried in the sun for 7 days, boiled 3 times, and later added with landy wine. Naturally, spells had to be added to this mixture. Diaz closed his eyes, the smoke from the candle enveloped him. The brunette thought that the infusions were strong enough to stupefy people. The next moment he realized that he now felt the same as during the rite of increasing luck. The policeman and the medium carefully watched the guy's reaction. He again thought that this time he was no longer bothered by the crazy headache like during the ritual. The woman, who, just like Diaz, was shrouded in a thick haze, introduced herself officially in a low voice. Spiritual medium, Daly. The woman said that people have extensive cognitive capabilities. Many secrets can be found inside hidden thoughts, which are like a deep ocean, and what people know about themselves are only small islands above the surface of the water. The deep voice enchanted and put him in a hypnotic state. Diaz's eyes closed under the speeches that there were many more islands hidden under the water and people were able to see only a small part. The woman continued to talk about the ocean, the boundless sky above her head, symbolizing the spiritual world, but the guy was surprised that he could still think calmly and rationally, as during the ritual and meeting. The brunette didn't know what else the medium would do to him, so he decided to pretend that he had already fallen under her spell. The last drop of fragrance fell on the candle. Daly said that Klein is the soul in this body, and he knows not only about the tops of the islands that are visible above the surface of the water, but also about what is hidden in the depths. And if it exists, it will leave traces behind. When Diaz opened his eyes again, he saw that the living room had disappeared, and they themselves, in the same chairs, seemed to be under a layer of clear water. He asked himself the question, where are they? Is this really the ocean of his mind? Daly, clasping her hands in a prayerful gesture, replied that memories underwater may be erased, but under the water, or perhaps in it, their reflections definitely remain. Diaz weakly objected to her words. He didn't think so. The woman repeated the same words. The guy is a soul in this body. He knows a lot about what is hidden in the ocean, but the brunette stubbornly said that he could not remember. If it exists, it will leave behind traces, and again, no memories. Diaz pretended that he was in great pain. He clenched his teeth and closed his eyes as hard as he could. Daly repeated the same words like a mantra. The woman frowned when she realized that no changes had occurred. Finally, she said that they could end this and they could return. These words echoed loudly throughout the space, and the room began to transform again. The trio found themselves back in Welch's living room. Diaz slowly opened his eyes. The candle standing on the table had almost burned out. Is it really all over at last? Dunsmith folded his arms across his chest and displeasedly asked Daly why she used the theory of a bunch of madmen alchemists of psychology. To which the woman replied that she considered it accurate. It at least corresponded to what the medium had seen before. She spread her hands. This cunning man, Klein, did not leave them any clues. The guy seemed to have just woken up. He understood that he had already been in a similar situation during the ritual, but still asked what happened. Was it really a dream? The medium and the policeman looked at each other. Is the test really over? Dunn stood up and said it was safe to assume they were done, and asked Daly if she had checked Welch and Naya's bodies. She replied that the corpses can tell more than one can imagine, but, unfortunately, Welch and Naya actually committed suicide. She extinguished the candle with a movement of her fingers, and continued that the force that influenced them was frightening, and did not leave a single clue, and after everything, Daly needed to rest. As Diaz and Dunn stood on the street, the officer congratulated the guy on the fact that he could now go home, but made him promise not to tell anyone about the incident. The brunette asked if he needed to be checked for curses or evil spirits. Nighthawks shook his head. Since Davy didn't speak, it means there's no need. Diaz asked if he would continue to have problems, to which he was told that there was no point in worrying, because 80% of the people who went through this did not experience such problems, more or less. Dunn then said that Klein could join the Nighthawks as civilian personnel, or simply become an otherworlder. The guy beamed. He can. What? The policeman, turning around, said that their organization is not nannies, they cannot watch people for days. But if Klein joins the Hawks, he will quickly be able to detect any alarming signs immediately after their appearance. Diaz was shocked. Is it really possible to become otherworldly? Is it really that easy? The man stopped and added that it was not entirely impossible, but it would be problematic. Diaz froze, not knowing how to react to this. With his hands in his pockets, Dunn said that becoming one of the Nighthawks required many sacrifices, including one's own freedom. And even without taking this into account, there are problems. For example, Klein is not a priest or close to the church, and therefore will not be able to choose the safest path to becoming otherworldly. Also, the incidents that Nighthawks, Punisher Saints, Unity Machine Intelligence, and other judicial bodies encounter every year. A quarter of them are otherworldly creatures that have lost control, and most of this quarter are comrades of the organization. Diaz repeated the words spoken with his lips. Then, when the policeman got into the carriage, he asked the question, why is the life of an otherworldly fraught with such serious dangers? So much so that even the otherworlders of the church's judicial systems can succumb to their influence. The man replied that this is not something that needs to be understood now, and the guy could not, unless he became one of them. Diaz was silent, digesting the information. Both got into the carriage. The guy asked how to make a decision if he had so little information, and thought that if he didn't join, he would never know anything. The policeman, filling his pipe with tobacco, replied that the guy probably misunderstood him, because there were ordinary citizens in their ranks. The brunette thought about it, and asked that as soon as he becomes one of the employees, what the organization keeps secret will become available. And after he becomes clear about the possible hidden dangers that otherworlders have to face, it will be then that a decision can be made as to whether Diaz wants to be one or not. The man replied that yes, but it is worth realizing that making such a decision does not mean that Klein will really become otherworldly. All churches are equally strict in this. The guy clarified that becoming a civilian employee is not so easy, to which Dunn said that he wouldn't have any problems with this. Could it really be, the brunette thought, that it was his ability to be reborn that would even make itself known? The policeman immediately explained, without their help, Klein was able to survive the incident. This alone indicates an advantage over an ordinary person, but it is possible that this was just luck. Although, he added, lucky ones are always welcome among their ranks. The man smiled. This could be taken as a joke, and added that a graduate of the Faculty of History from Koei University would be very useful to them. The organization deals with ancient documents and objects. There are cults and heretics who can use all this for their own evil purposes, except for some specialists. Most otherworldly people do not have special skills, so the Hawks are interested in cooperation with experts. But this can also lead to leakage of information. Smith pointed to his temple and said that boring knowledge makes people sleepy, to which Diaz asked why don't they train a historian from scratch. The man replied that in the case of Klein, he did not violate the oath of confidentiality, but with training there was a different problem. He would be responsible for the secrets told. Most teams, including civilians, are formed from the church. The brunette couldn't understand why the organization was so strict about confidentiality, because if more people knew about such things, it would help avoid similar problems in the future. The policeman replied that in this case, residents would know about such cases and begin to imitate them, which would make their work more difficult. Brunette continued, people do not learn from history, but repeat the same mistakes over and over again. The policeman noted that this is a quote from Emperor Roselle. There is truth in it. Diaz was surprised that the Emperor actually said this and thought that the reincarnation elder knew a lot. It seemed that he had no blind spots and left Diaz without the opportunity to boast of knowledge from another world. Dunn said the judiciary of the main churches has a similar saying, which may be the main argument for confidentiality, the reason why they cannot tell it to ordinary people. Diaz leaned forward and asked what the reason was. The man replied that faith and fear create troubles, sometimes in double form, destroying absolutely everything. Apart from praying to the gods for blessings and help, people have no other way to solve their most serious problems. The policeman then asked if Klein would like to join the Hawks and become one of the civilian employees, to which he asked for a delay to think about it. He was promised until Sunday to respond. The man reminded him of his promise not to tell anyone, otherwise Klein would cause trouble for someone, but would also end up in front of a special court. Finally, they arrived at Diaz's house. The guy, blushing, turned to Mr. Smith. Then he asked what kind of pay and benefits the civilian staff received. The policeman replied that they were funded by the church and the police department. Civilian personnel received a weekly pay of 12 coins upon joining, and there was also a 10-coin allowance for confidentiality and risks associated with the work. The guy was delighted with this amount, and Dunn added that the salary will increase as qualifications increase. Civilian personnel are usually given a 5-year contract, after which the person may not renew it. Also, if a person leaves the organization, they will be asked to write a lifetime non-disclosure agreement, will not be able to leave Tianjin without prior permission, and if moving to another city will need to register with the local Nighthawks, work in shifts. There must always be at least 3 civilian employees per shift. The brunette asked where he should go to find Hawks when he made his decision. Smith spoke about the Hound Bar on Basic Street. You will need to find the manager and tell him that Klein wants to hire a small detachment of mercenaries. To Diaz's surprised silent question, the man calmly replied that their location was secret and would not be disclosed. Finally, the policeman wished Mr. Klein Morty pleasant dreams. Diaz watched the retreating crew. He looked at his pocket watch. It was no more than 4 in the morning. Finally, the session with the spiritual medium can be considered over. Was his shirt really wet with sweat all this time? Entering the room, Diaz was stopped by his sister's stern voice. She got up early to go to the bathroom, and realized that Klein was not at home. The guy smiled awkwardly. Why is Melissa here? She couldn't find anything. He explained that he woke up late at night, and couldn't fall asleep again. He didn't want to waste time, so he decided to go for a run. Klein turned to show off his shirt, which was covered in sweat. Melissa exhaled slightly annoyed. Melissa said that Klein didn't need to worry. He would definitely be able to pass the interview at Tianjin University, and if he didn't succeed, he would find something better. Kyle hesitated, smiled awkwardly, and thought that he had completely forgotten about the interview, and until he made a decision about the Nighthawks, there was no point in telling his sister about them. The girl turned away, reached for something, and asked the guy to wait a minute. The next moment, she stretched out her hands, and on her palms lay a small mechanical turtle. Kyle gasped in shock. Melissa explained that she had finished a craft the other day. She had picked up a couple of spare parts for it from school and found some on the side of the road. Bending over the table, the girl placed the mechanical little thing on the surface, and it hummed, moving funny. Melissa said that her anxiety immediately calmed down thanks to the turtle's movements. Kyle enthusiastically called his sister a miracle, and for some reason asked if it was a turtle. Melissa looked at him in bewilderment, and replied that it was a doll. The brunette blushed, explaining that he was mistaken because of the type of materials. He also asked his sister why she went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, since she had a wash basin in her room. Suddenly the girl's stomach growled loudly in the silence of the room. Kyle looked at his sister with a smile, who embarrassedly covered her stomach with her hand, trying to muffle the sounds of her stomach. Finally, she became embarrassed and literally ran out of the room, hissing that she was going to bed. The guy thought that a lot of food at yesterday's dinner was the result of such a reaction. Outside the window it was gradually getting light, and the sky was painted in a purple pre-dawn hue. Kyle never went to bed. He sat at the table, resting his chin in his hands, wondering whether to accept Dunn Smith's offer. In the morning, the guy put on the best suit from the previous owner's closet and cleaned his bowler hat. He reflected that, being under constant surveillance by the Nighthawks as a future beyonder, and with his identity as a jester, he was at a certain risk. But the benefit from the meetings, if he joins the Hawks, will be the opportunity to become an otherworldly. However, the Nighthawks are a very strict organization. Once a mission is assigned, it cannot be rejected. Even civilians have many restrictions. They cannot go wherever they want. More importantly, the Beyonders are constantly at risk of losing control of themselves. But still, if something strange happens to Kyle, he will reflect this with the Hawks, and at the meetings he will be able to get the potion formulas, but not the material, which could compromise him. By joining the organization, the guy will gain access to secret knowledge about the otherworldly and provide himself with income. Still, joining the Nighthawks would give him better cover and protection. Kyle could even join one of the organizations that are suppressed by various large churches and, with their help, become a Beyonder, which threatens the loss of freedom. The guy walked up to the door of the Hound Bar, which Dunn had told him about, and thought about the fact that in the future, if he becomes one of the highest authorities in the tribunal, who will be able to guess that he is a heretic, the head of a secret organization. The bartender behind the counter, polishing glasses, indifferently listed the prices for the drinks to the guy before he even had time to open his mouth. But Kyle raised his hat and said he was looking for Mr. Wright. The bartender lowered his head and addressed someone below, under the counter, that they were looking for him. A drunken baby was heard in a hand, holding a half-empty bottle, caught on the bar counter. The man leaned his elbow on the surface and somehow playfully asked Kyle if he was looking for him. The guy was surprised, but still asked if he could hire a small detachment of mercenaries. His interlocutor clarified who exactly asked him to come here for something like that. The brunette replied that Dan Smith. For a moment, an awkward silence hung in the air. Suddenly the man laughed loudly, saying that in modern times such detachments operate differently, and you can find a similar detachment on Southland Street, on the second floor in House 36. Having thanked him, Kyle went outside, and after a while he found the right house. He looked thoughtfully at the door, then saw a sign hanging next to it. It said Ternovnik Security Company, which rather surprised the brunette. He plucked up his courage and knocked loudly on the door several times. He carefully pulled the handle. It gave in and the door opened, but no one greeted him. Entering the room, he saw large shelves with books, in front of which stood a carved table. Behind him sat a young girl, asleep. She rested her elbows on some newspapers. Apparently, they tired her extremely. Kyle looked back and thought that this security company is just a front. Isn't it too unprofessional? The guy tapped his finger on the table to attract attention, jumped up. The stranger abruptly covered herself with the newspaper and began reading it loudly, almost hysterically. After muttering something else out of sleep, she finally noticed the guy standing in front of her. He politely introduced himself as the owner of the body and said that he was here at the invitation of Dunn Smith. The girl stood up abruptly and asked to wait until she called the captain. But Kyle thought that the lack of hospitality was disturbing. He was not even offered a glass of water. Having returned, the stranger asked the guy to follow her, since Mr. Smith was on duty at the Chinese gate today and could not leave his post. Walking along the corridor past one of the rooms, Kyle managed to notice a young policeman whom he had already seen in his room. He also noticed the guy and seemed to recognize him. The girl, not noticing anything, shouted to Klein, who was walking behind, that they needed to go down several flights of stairs. She, laughing, talked with all her might about how she was afraid of slipping on the stairs, about Leonard greeting the brunette earlier, and much more about what Kyle turned a deaf ear and did not comment on. Finally, they found themselves at a huge gate. The girl said that this is the gate of Chinese. At the crossroads they passed earlier, the path to the left leads to the Cathedral of St. Celine, and to the right leads to the armory, storeroom and archives, but you have to go to the gate directly. According to Kyle's calculations, Zuland Street was directly behind Red Moonlight Street. There was an inconspicuous room next to the gate. The girl directed the guy there. He apologized for the disturbance. Only now the girl came to her senses and introduced herself. Her name was Rosanna. The girl had been in the organization for 5 years, just like her father, who sacrificed himself for the sake of work 5 years ago. Kyle bowed slightly when the girl expressed hope that they would become colleagues, and replied that they needed to wait for Mr. Smith's answer on the matter. He pushed the door. It creaked quietly. Dunn Smith was reading a newspaper, and when he heard the sound, he looked in that direction with only his eyes. Seeing the visitor, he perked up and invited Kyle to sit down, asking if he had decided to join the organization. Without wasting time, the man immediately invited the guy to read and sign the agreement, and if the contents of the document were leaked, the brunette would be tried in the tribunal of the Church of the Goddess of Eternal Night. Kyle signed the document a few minutes later, thinking about the official name of the organization: Taigan City Nighthawks Squad, Ava District, Lone Kingdom. Smith extended his hand and congratulated the guy. From that moment he became one of them. Kyle shook the captain's hand, then expressed surprise at their cover, referring to the Blackthorn Security Company, and asked what would happen if the organization actually wanted to be hired for security. The man, folding his arms across his chest, replied that if it did not interfere with the actual work, there was no reason for them to refuse additional money. He held out a paper that indicated the other names of the organization and the characteristics of the structure. The Hawks are the 7th Division of the Special Operations Department of the Police of the country of Ava. The first 4 divisions are regular police officers. The 5th and subsequent ones deal with paranormal phenomena in each of the cities of the district. Their unit is responsible for incidents involving the followers of the goddess of eternal night in Tianjin. When other types of followers appear in the area, their responsibilities will be divided by region. The Hawks are responsible for the regions of the North, West, and Golden Indian. The university and suburbs are subordinate to the 5th Division, which is a detachment of the Machine Hive. The 6th Division, the authorized punishers from the Church of the Stormlord, is responsible for the docks, eastern and southern regions. Kyle asked how many Nighthawks were in their squad. Mr. Smith replied that in the city of Tianjin, including him, there were 6 official members of the Nighthawks, and about the same number of civilians. Kyle recalled that the man had told him about the Beyonders losing control and asked why this was happening. Dunn looked at the guy seriously and asked if he knew about the creation myth. Luckily, Klein's mother was a devout believer in the goddess of the eternal night, and the boy had read about the myth and revelation of the eternal night during his Sunday church school lessons. The Creator awakened in the midst of chaos, destroyed darkness, and created the first rays of light. He completely integrated himself into the universe, giving birth to all things. His body became the earth and space. One of his eyes became the sun and the other the crimson moon. Part of his blood went into rivers and oceans. The creation myth states that the goddess of eternal night is the crimson moon, one of the eyes of the Creator, and people are born from the wisdom of the Creator, so people have intelligence but no magical abilities. It can also be concluded that all things come from one and the same source. Kyle thought about it. The man continued to say that the conclusion follows from this: people, by creating potions made from crystals or parts taken from living beings, can gain powers. But if you consume a high-grade potion directly, everything can end tragically. The first option is death of the mind and physical collapse. Every part of a person becomes a terrifying monster. The second is that the power contained in the potion will change the person's personality. He will become cold, irritable, cruel, or indifferent. The third is a mental deviation that drives you crazy. A person is filled with demonic energy. Kyle imagined these terrifying pictures. After a long period of experimentation, also with the birth of the blasphemous tablet, the potion system was improved. Chains of sequences were formed. Each of the 7 churches controls at least one of them. The guy asked what the blasphemous tablet was because he remembered Hangman mentioning it. Mr. Smith replied that she was created by evil gods, and he himself did not understand this. But if Klein found any information, he should report it immediately. The guy was told that the tablet was a critical factor in the formation and completion of the potion system. The type of loss of control caused by the potion is one of the 5, the second type being people who are born with high perception, and they have some characteristics of the Beyonder. They are more or less comparable to the 9th sequence of the Beyonders, and form the bottom tier within the chain, can only select potions from those corresponding to their sequences, otherwise mental disorders may occur. In severe cases, they lose control or die. The third type of loss of control is similar to the second. If you choose a chain of sequences and then break it, the person definitely remains in a state of half-madness. All subsequent potions will not help. The only difference is instant death or transformation into an evil spirit. Kyle leaned forward and asked what the 4th type was. Dunn replied that this type is the most common. By drinking the potion, a person gains the abilities of unusual creatures, and since it is unnatural, it will have an effect on the human mind. By consuming a higher quality potion before mastering the powers of the previous one, breaking the sequence, the madness will accumulate. So you must first wait 3 years before consuming the potion, and also undergo an examination. The guy thought it was terrible, and asked about the 5th species. The lower the number of species sequence, the higher the perception. People can hear and see what others cannot. They face mysterious temptations and illusory spells. When greedy desires arise, such people will begin to slowly descend down the path of loss of control. The creator of the modern Nighthawks system once described the organization as guardians, but also a bunch of unfortunate sinners. Sinners who struggle with danger and madness. Mr. Smith asked if Klein was disappointed because being in Beyonder was certainly not what he had imagined. The guy replied that everything good has its price, and he doesn't know if he will ever have such an opportunity again. Dunn praised him for his mature outlook, and said that in order to become a Beyonder, one must accumulate enough contributions and one must also find out what the higher ranks have to say. He stood up from the table and walked to the door, saying that he wanted to introduce the guy to the work he would do as a civilian in the Nighthawk squad. Now the staff has an accountant, a person in charge of supplying supplies, and a coachman. They do not work shifts, so they rest on Sunday. The rest of the civilians, such as Roseanne and Old Man Neil, are responsible for writing and organizing records, guarding the armory, storeroom, and archives. Everyone has a day off a week, excluding Sunday, and they agree among themselves who will get which day. Kyle asked if he would do the same work as Rosanna. The captain replied that a specialist does not do that. The guy will go for a walk once a day. You need to pay special attention to the streets that lead from Welch's residence to his. The brunette was surprised that a specialist was needed for such work. Dunn Smith said that the loss of memory for Klein means closure of the case of Welch and Naya. But since the Antigonus family notebook was not found, the Hawks do not exclude the possibility that Klein himself took it with him and hid it, although he forgot about it. But near a key place memory may return. Kyle was also told that finding the notebook could make him an otherworldly. He also had to go to the armory in his free time and read literature with ancient records. After finishing the reading he would need to exchange it with others. The captain spoke in more detail about the Chinese Gate, named after the creator of the Nighthawks system. Every major city has one under the central cathedral. Members of the Nighthawks take turns guarding them. Inside the Chinese Gate there are also 2 guardians sent from the church, as well as countless traps. Potion formulas and materials are stored there. This place is used to temporarily contain heretics and cultists. In addition, there are also a large number of highly classified documents and historical records, and upon promotion, Klein will have the opportunity to read some of them. Mr. Smith said that there are sealed artifacts outside the Chinese Gate on the lowest floor. Kyle asked in surprise which ones. The man replied that some of the items contain too much magical power and are quite dangerous. Some of them exhibit the properties of living. They will try to seduce the guardians. They need to be kept under guard. Headquarters has classified these sealed artifacts into 4 classes. They range from Class 0 to Class 3. Class 0 artifacts are very dangerous. 1 to 3 are less dangerous. Dunn handed his subordinate a photograph of a blond man with eyes of different colors and asked him to look carefully. 3 years ago, a new archbishop was appointed, who lost control. He and the sealed Class 0 artifact went missing. Kyle studied the photo carefully. In Sanguil, male, 40 years old, former archbishop, a gatekeeper who failed in his promotion and was seduced by the devil. Mr. Smith warned that in case of a possible meeting it is better not to disturb the man, due to the fact that from this acquaintance one could die on the spot. Description of the classes of sealed artifacts. Class 3 quite dangerous. Must be used with caution. Can be used if 3 or more people participate in the operation. The minimum access level is official membership in the Nighthawks. Class 2 dangerous. Care must be taken when using. Only available to bishops, Nighthawk squad leaders and above. Class 1 high danger. Can only be used in strictly designated situations. Access to them is limited at the level of the diocesan bishop or deacon of the Nighthawks. Class 0 is extremely dangerous. Requires strict control and a high level of confidentiality. Cannot be asked about or talked about with third parties. Must always be sealed in the lowest level of the Holy Cathedral. Kyle was surprised that the fugitive himself was described in detail, and the mention of the artifact was only its number. The captain replied that level 0 is the highest level of confidentiality. The search for 0-08 is only talked about, details are not recorded. All that is known is that the artifact looks like a feather, and can write without ink. The man did not know anything more. After this, Dunn instructed Klein to find Old Man Neil in the arsenal so that he could compile a list of documents to read. He failed to get a promotion while working in the Hawks, and the old man does not want to rest, and spends all his time alone with books. Kyle thought that an ordinary pen without ink had no value. Maybe it was something like the death pen, where you write someone's name and the person dies. But it's hard to believe, because in that case since Sanguil wouldn't have to run. Before dismissing the employee, the captain reminded him to call on Miss Oriana, the accountant, to receive an advance payment of £12, and he would also receive half his salary each week until the difference was accounted for. The guy waved his hands, saying there was no need for this. To this, his boss, leaning back in his chair, noted that Klein might be uncomfortable continuing to live in his apartment, where even the bathroom is shared. Moreover, the guy will need a new suit and a cane. Dunn pulled the bell rope to call Rosanna for help. In the room where the girl was sitting, the bell rang loudly and suddenly, which horrified Rosanna. She immediately rushed to the boss's office, who asked his subordinate to take Moretti to Miss Oriana. Rosanna exhaled in disappointment and meekly agreed. The boss once again called Klein, who was standing on the threshold, to come to him. He told the guy not to forget to get 10 bullets for hunting demons from Old Man Neil. He was surprised that he would be trusted with such things. Dunsmith replied that since Klein now had Welch's revolver, they would not take the weapon, so the guy could protect himself and be more confident. He handed the brunette a document to receive bullets, who thanked the boss. To Kyle's disappointment, Dunn once again called out to him to take the document, as he forgot that he had not yet practiced shooting. Instead, the captain instructed Kyle to receive 30 regular bullets every day and train at shooting range number 3 on Southland Street, and receive a badge from Old Man Neil to get into the shooting range. The man signed the documents and said that good shooters can only be made through piles of spent cartridges. There is no need to look down on this idea. Kyle extended his hand to pick up the papers and asked if everything was accurate this time. Smith answered in the affirmative. Leaving the office with Rosanna, the guy breathed a sigh of relief. The girl smiled and noticed that the captain is always so forgetful, but he always remembers the most important thing, and the girl also said that the accountant, Miss Oriana, is very kind and easy to get along with. Finally, they arrived at the woman's office. They were greeted by an accountant with a good-natured expression on her face, and immediately asked how she could help. Kyle introduced himself and said that the captain told him to ask for his salary 4 weeks in advance. Oriana immediately handed over a document where it was necessary to sign, also put a stamp or, if there was none, use a fingerprint. The guy thought it was strange that you didn't need proof to get money. Handing over the money, the woman asked why Klein was invited to work, whether he was involved in a paranormal incident, or whether he specialized in something. The brunette nodded, smiling. The accountant's intuition did not let him down. She, folding her hands on her knees, replied that she got here in the same way. So, a gentleman's suit, silk top hat, 5 to 6 coins, bow tie 3 coins, shirt dress 3 coins, cane with silver inlay, 7 to 8 coins, vest and suit, 7 pounds, leather boots 9 to 10 coins. Total price is 8 pounds and 7 coins. This excludes the cost of the pocket watch, chain and wallet. Now Kyle was walking around in rather dubious and old clothes. Miss Oriana revealed that if it weren't for the Nighthawks, she would have become the 6th victim of the serial killer who caused a stir in Tianjin 16 years ago. Klein remembered that he was a serial killer who collected the organs of his victims. Being in Beyonder, he was caught red-handed. He was preparing a demonic ritual. The guy thought about what was said, what kind of ritual it was that required so many organs, and does the status of the other world play a role here? But the next moment Kyle was already rejoicing at the money he had acquired, counting them. Even Benson had a lower salary. Dead presidents, dead kings, he loved them so much, and now the brunette had to go to the armory. Approaching the door of the room, he knocked and a voice inside invited him to enter. An elderly man was sitting at the table. He immediately greeted Klein Moretti and noticed that, according to the stories of little Rosanna, he was very well brought up. The man immediately offered a cup of ground coffee. Kyle noticed that Neil's own mug contained plain water. The old man smiled and said that his rules were not to drink coffee after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so that he could sleep better at night and not hear the whispers of an unknown creature. The guy nodded and refused coffee, then asked what list of literature he needed. The man replied that everything related to history is complex. He himself is trying to learn, but he can only master basic things. The rest is too incomprehensible. Neil pointed at the documents on the table. He needed more detailed historical records to understand what it said, but for now the man was missing too much context. Those papers were pages from Roselle Gustave's diary, which was lost after his death. To keep everything secret, he wrote the contents with strange symbols of his own invention. Kyle remembered who Roselle was, his older brother in misfortune, who received a second chance. Neil said that many people think that Roselle did not die, but became a god. Some cults even performed rituals on his part to gain power. Now the Hawks received several pages of copies of the diary. So far no one has been able to decipher them. The man has already confirmed that some symbols here are used to represent numbers. This is proof of the authenticity of the diary. Now he wants to compare the historical events that took place around the emperor with the corresponding dates in the diary. Perhaps this will help the specialist decipher more symbols. Kyle smiled awkwardly and picked up the paper to try to make out what was written. Imagine his surprise when he saw the Chinese language, and even simplified, and the notes themselves described some kind of experiment. Neil said that the 3 pages are from different time periods. It appears that the Emperor only wrote down the year for New Year's Day entries, and it is currently unknown which year the November and September entries are from. The old man called out to Klein, who was thinking about something. He, having woken up, lied that he was thinking about his chosenness, and would be able to decipher the records. Hawk replied that he had thought in exactly the same way once. Kyle asked if this was all the pages. Neil replied that this was a lot, because all other worldly affairs are very few in number, and those associated with fools who worship the Emperor are even rarer. Neil said he was lucky to get those 3 pages, then looked at Kyle's list of requirements again, and asked if he had a shoulder holster. The old man joked that it was not good for a gentleman to have a bulge below the waist. The guy was a little embarrassed, and asked if he should ask the captain to add this to his equipment request. Neil muttered that it wasn't necessary, it was just an accessory. The brunette asked if the old man worked as a teacher. He nodded. The man taught in church schools and free public schools. Kyle glanced at the copies of the diary. He must find more pages of this mysterious emperor's notes. Coming out of the armory, the guy looked at his new shoulder holster, hidden in the folds of his coat. It fit him perfectly. He slapped his forehead. He completely forgot to ask about the potion sequences. The diary completely distracted him. Right now, he didn't know what the 9th sequence of the completed path of the Eternal Night Goddess Church was. Suddenly footsteps were heard and a thin figure appeared in the doorway. At the entrance to the stairs stood that same mysterious officer. Kyle said hello and said he probably didn't need to introduce himself again. The guy replied that he had a deep impression of Moretti as a temperamental person. His own name is Leonard Mitchell, the 8th sequence, the Midnight Poet. Kyle was surprised by his description, and in his heart he agreed that Leonard looked like a poet. Passing by, the guy noticed that what happened to Klein already made him special enough, and immediately said goodbye. However, when Kyle was already halfway up the stairs, Leonard stopped. In a whisper, he asked the void if anything had been noticed. Then, he lowered his head in disappointment. That's what he thought. There was nothing special about Klein. Kyle visited Roseanne's office again. The girl said that the captain ordered the employee not to return until Monday. Let him deal with household chores first. The guy thought that he should have warned the assistant professor who invited the original owner of the body for an interview that he would not be able to attend. Suddenly Kyle started looking around as if he had lost something. He made sure that no one was nearby and quietly asked the girl if she knew anything about the complete sequence of the Church of the Goddess of Eternal Night. Rosanna gasped. Does the brunette really want to become an otherworldly? The girl began her story. The complete sequence of the church begins with the 9th sleepless. As the name suggests, they do not need to sleep, they become stronger at night. After that comes the sequence of 8, Midnight Poet, then the 7th, Nightmare. And as for the rest, only the captain knows. But in the Church of the Goddess there are 2 otherworldly 7 sequences in Tianjin. Once old man Neil mentioned the name of the 9th, which is the name of the potion seer of the secret. There is also a second 7th incomplete sequence spiritual medium. The girl seriously asked Klein if it would not be better to just be a civilian. The enemies of the beyond are not limited to cultists and dark sorcerers, since they can become their enemies. Almost every year someone loses control and sacrifices themselves. So, in other words, Captain and Mrs. Daly are the 7th sequence beyonders, the nightmare and the spiritual medium. High-consistency otherworlders are very rare. Thus, the 7th sequence beyonders will be considered one of the main weapons of the church. But nevertheless, Klein received more information about them, and when he collects even more knowledge, he may be able to return to his home world. He decided that it was better not to think about it for now, because he was paid, and the guy would invite Melissa to a nice dinner that evening. Although he only has 3 coins left in change, this is not enough even for a trip home. But maybe with this money they will still take him halfway. The brunette cherished the bills in his hands and thought that he could not walk, and changing money was also not profitable because of the 5% commission. Suddenly, Kyle noticed something interesting. Opposite, glittering with windows, was a clothing store that he needed to visit. There he was met by a good-natured saleswoman who immediately offered her services. Kyle looked around and asked to show him the cane, heavy and strong. The girl took the rod itself from the display case, made from the core of an iron tree, inlaid with gold. Kyle hesitated, agreed to hold her, but refused because of the terrible cost. The seller offered various options: white wood, silver. Kyle still refused. Finally, the rather tired seller handed the buyer an ebony cane, instructed with silver, for only 7 coins. Weighing the cane in his hands, Kyle finally agreed the cheapest one. He handed the bill to the seller, who grabbed the edge and thanked him. The guy started talking about the discount, but the girl almost interrupted him with a scream, "No way." She handed over the cane and the change, and the brunette jumped up and down joyfully under the salesman's unreadable gaze. He'd even have enough for the fare. Finally, Kyle returned home. He found a revolver and loaded it with the bullets he received. The guy was happy that his sense of security had finally returned. The door creaked, and he quickly put his hand with the gun behind his back. It was Melissa, offering to reheat the leftovers from last night's dinner, and saying that Benson would probably be back tomorrow. Having quietly hidden the revolver in a desk drawer, Kyle distracted his sister with conversation. He suggested celebrating getting a job at the Silver Crown restaurant. The girl was surprised. She believed that her brother would soon have an interview at Tianjin University. Kyle replied that he had found a security company that found and protected ancient relics. He signed a contract for 5 years and would earn £3 a week. They even gave an advance for 4 weeks in advance. Melissa stammered that she did not understand why her brother was given such a large amount in advance. He raised his index finger up, because his family needed to move. The sister suddenly said that they were living well, but Kyle did not understand what she was getting at. She raised her hands up and said that her complaints about not having her own bathroom were just a bad habit, that others were even worse off, and that her family was very lucky to have neighbors. The brunette thought that everything suited him, but such a place of residence was clearly not for Melissa, especially since he needs to become an otherworldly, and such crowded housing imposes certain risks. Kyle explained to Melissa that the government agency would pay regularly, especially since he was looking for a city house to move into, and they definitely needed their own rooms. A place near Iron Cross Street would be perfect. They discussed such things as Benson's return, that they should wait for his arrival, and to warn the landlord, Mr. Frankie, about the move. Melissa spoke with concern about her classmate, who had to drop out of school due to financial problems in the family, and since the country has an unstable government, it is necessary to save money for a rainy day. Kyle smiled at his sister, thinking that she was pretty good at this sort of thing. He suggested a compromise to celebrate at home, and Melissa could buy food and beer, and also remember to go to Mrs. Smirren for lemon pie. Kyle walked down the street, tapping his cane, and thought that Tingdong University was without a doubt one of the most renowned universities in the Lone Kingdom. The nearby Koi University absolutely pales in comparison. Kyle knocked on the door to the office, where he was met by Mr. Stone, who asked what the guy needed, because there was still an hour left before the interview. The guy introduced himself again, recalling that he was a student of Associate Professor of Koiga's department, Klein Moretti. He also showed his letter of recommendation. Then the brunette said that he had already found a job and would not participate in the interview. Mr. Stone congratulated him and thanked him for the warning. The voice of Professor Cohen was heard behind him. He heard the conversation and asked Klein about work, followed by another university employee, Mr. Azek. The men came here to participate in a scientific conference. Kyle said he found a job as a professional consultant for a security company, and noticed that he enjoyed researching history rather than summarizing it. The professor said that everyone finds their own path, and was glad that the student remembered to come and inform everyone. Azek asked the guy what happened to Welch and Naya, since the newspapers wrote that they were killed by robbers. Kyle was surprised by this version, but replied that he himself did not know what really happened. I wonder if these history teachers know any details. Kyle also said that Welch received a diary that belonged to the Antigonus family from the Solomon Empire during the Fourth Era and asked a friend to decipher the contents, which Klein did for several days, and then focused on finding a job, and also to him the police came not long ago. Azek tried to remember where he had heard about Antigones before. Professor Cohen said that he did not remember this at all. Azek agreed that he could have mixed something up. Kyle asked the men to write to him if they remembered any additional information, because he was very interested in the history of the Fourth Era. Looking at his watch, Cohen told the student that he would definitely inform him, and then hurried his colleague. The conference was about to begin. Finally, Kyle clarified what exactly was written in the newspapers regarding the case with Welch and Naya. Azek handed him Tingona's morning newspaper, which contained the details of that incident. The professor reminded the guy to send his address, and also that for him and Mr. Isaac, letters could be sent to the address of the History Department of Khoi University. Kyle was reading the newspaper as he walked. According to the police, the murder scene was horrific. All valuables were missing. The crime, according to them, was committed by a group of cruel and evil bandits. Suddenly, his thoughts about the police hiding everything were interrupted by a strange sensation. His heart skipped a beat, and the guy's eyes widened in shock. Someone was watching him. The guy understood that it was not his imagination, and he clearly senses the fact of surveillance. Has his relocation, or the ritual of increasing luck strengthened his sixth sense? The brunette ran to the nearest transport, and asked the coachman to take him to Champagne Street. He was told that it would cost 6 pence. Kyle knew that he couldn't just go home until he knew the other party's motives. They probably had bad intentions. It was necessary to find the Nighthawks, but under no circumstances by a direct route, otherwise the organization would be exposed. The only option is to go to the Tingan headquarters of the Church of the Goddess of Eternal Night, the Cathedral of St. Celine. Kyle went into the cathedral, where the priest read a sermon to the few parishioners. They are naked, without water, food and clothing, suffering from the cold, wet through torrential rains, for they had nowhere to hide. They huddled near the rocks. Eternal Night did not forget about them and showed mercy to them. The brunette realized in surprise that the feeling of being watched had disappeared. He went into the confessional, but not to confess. There he told the Holy Father, holding out a coin in the form of a sign of the organization, that he wanted to find Mr. Dunn Smith. He replied that Kyle needed to leave the confessional, turn right, and continue walking forward until the very end. There will be a secret door nearby. After entering it, someone will guide the guy along the remaining path. The robed man led Kyle forward as he remembered Roseanne's words. If you turn left at the intersection at the Chinese Gate, you can walk to St. Celine's Cathedral. The stranger pointed to the door and explained that you need to go down, turn right at the intersection, and then the final goal will be the Chinese Gate, and finally he blessed Kyle. The guy carefully went down the stairs, carefully following the directions. Finally, he arrived in the office where Rosanna was sitting, knocking softly on the table, because the girl, as always, was immersed in reading. She jumped up, surprised by Klein's arrival. The guy replied that he needed to talk to the captain. The girl complained that he scared her to death. Couldn't he have knocked on the door first? Kyle entered the captain's office, reading the newspaper, and seemed not at all surprised by the sudden appearance of an employee, asking what he needed. The guy sat down in a chair and said that someone was watching him. Dunn clarified how the employee came to the organization. The brunette, stuttering, confirmed that he was coming from the cathedral. Mr. Smith theorized that Welch's father did not believe their cause of death and hired a private detective from the city of Wynn to investigate, and it may also be related to the diary. Now the Hawks are trying to find out where Welch received the diary. Do not forget that other individuals or organizers may be looking for it. Kyle asked what he should do in this case. The captain, calmly drinking water from a cup, replied that he should return the same way, and then do what his heart pleased. Klein asked incredulously, "Is it really that simple?" Dunn put the cup down on the table with a knock. "Whatever you want, but be sure to try not to scare off the other side and not go against the law." Once outside, Kyle was nervous and reasoned that now that he had left the cathedral, the feeling of being watched had returned. But still, why didn't that man follow him into the cathedral? What if that person has a dark past, and he is afraid of the church, afraid that the bishop will feel the presence of otherworldly forces? The guy became gloomy. He no longer thought that this was just a private detective. Suddenly he realized that he had come to the Zoot Land Shooting Club. There he handed the employee a sign of the organization, and he led him along. The guy decided that since he was being watched, it wouldn't hurt to learn self-defense. Gradually, the bullets he fired hit closer and closer to the center of the target. With practice, he honed his shooting skills better and better. The training time was up. Kyle found himself on the street, and was upset when he realized that the already forgotten feeling of being watched had returned once again. Surprisingly, the brunette returned home without incident. He opened the door of the room and found that Benson had returned. He was reading the newspaper. Both exchanged greetings, and the brother asked how the interview went. Klein replied that it was disgusting. Benson even put the newspaper aside. Kyle smiled and explained that he had not participated in the interview because he had already found another job in a security company that looked for antiques and paid £3 a week. So now he could think about moving to a better place. Benson smiled and exhaled. He was glad to hear what he heard, and suddenly he felt like a parent whose child had just become an adult. He offered to celebrate this event and buy beef, to which Klein complained about the high cost of food and the stupid currency system around the world. The two spent some time discussing how to develop a proper monetary system, Benson even praising his brother's increased sense of humor when he joked about the ruling class not understanding the complex concept of the decimal system. Two brothers and sister happily clinked glasses of beer. While enjoying Klein's dinner, Benson complimented his cooking skills and Melissa noted that it was all thanks to his training with Chef Welch. Kyle worriedly advised his sister to eat the pudding first, because it wouldn't taste as good on an empty stomach. But the girl couldn't stop eating everything on her plate. The trio suggested looking for a new place to live and also alerting their landlord, Mr. Frankie. The silence of the night was diluted by bursts of laughter from numerous jokes. Later, fast asleep, Klein heard someone calling his name. In the dream, an image appeared of Mr. Smith standing right in front of the guy. It became clear that the captain came to the guy in a dream, just like the last time. Kyle asked in surprise why the man had invaded his dream. The captain reported that someone had gotten into the guy's room, ordered him to take a revolver and forced the stranger to go out into the corridor. The Hawks would do the rest. In his dream, Kyle turned his head to the window. There was indeed a stranger in a coat standing near the table. Having approached him unnoticed, the guy put the revolver to the man's back and deliberately politely greeted him. He froze over the scattered books, and obeyed the order to raise his hands and turn around. Kyle said that it was necessary to move slowly, because sudden movements could provoke the trigger being pulled. The stranger's gaze was like that of a wild animal. The guy slowly led him to the door, convincing him to discuss everything on the street and not wake up the sleeping people. The brunette understood that one wrong move, and the stranger could tear him into pieces. Finally, they came to the door. The next moment the man opened the door and, despite the revolver right behind him, started running. Kyle thought desperately that the shooting would probably wake Benson up. In reality, Kyle himself was now lying in bed, restlessly tossing around in the sheets. The captain probably sent the guy a lullaby because he fell asleep again. Kyle and Dan Smith stood in the corridor. The captain said that everything was settled, and it took him time to enter the stranger's dreams. His subordinate asked if the identity of the fugitive had been established. The man said that the stranger was a member of an ancient organization called the Secret Order. The diary of the Antigonus family was also from them. Pointing the toe of his boot at the lying fugitive, the captain said that due to their own negligence, the diary ended up on the market, and Welch was able to get it. It is not surprising that a man was sent for the diary. Dunn planned that the organization would also hunt the Antigones, but they would understand that luck was not on their side. If the diary did not seem important to them, they would refuse the prey. Kyle asked what would happen if things didn't go as planned. Mr. Smith replied that their knowledge of the order was small, and today's success was due to Klein, so it would be credited to his personal merit. The man said that right now the guy has the opportunity to become an Beyonder, but he can only choose the starting potion from an incomplete sequence. Kyle, sweating with excitement, clarified which potions of the 9th sequence he could choose from. In addition to the sleepless one, the church has 3 more formulas for potions of the 9th sequence. The first is Priest of Secrets. This potion will allow you to gain various mystical knowledge. It will be possible to understand magical rituals and sense various mysterious entities. The second, Corpse Collector, gives resistance to cold, decay and corrosion from corpse auras. The potion also gives knowledge about the undead and the ability to see certain spirits, improves physical abilities. The third, Potion Seer, makes it possible to study astrology, fortune-telling by cards, use spiritual pendulums and predict the future. Kyle froze. He remembered that the seer was mentioned in the diary of Emperor Roselle. The captain continued, in terms of mystical knowledge, the seer is superior to the Priest of Secrets, but their combat effectiveness is less. Moreover, the organization has only the 9th part of the seer sequence. Dunn himself does not know if the Holy Cathedral has other potion formulas from this sequence. Kyle thought that the abilities of the Eldritch Low sequences would not be as effective in battle as firearms, so these 3 potions suit his needs. Besides, the Holy Cathedral is the Serenity Cathedral, the main branch of the church. Mr. Smith, folding his arms across his chest, asked his subordinate to talk about his choice on Monday. No matter what he chooses, none of the Nighthawks would challenge his choice. Turning around, the man finally said that this question requires a calm choice and seeking an answer from the heart. Kyle thought that this feeling was comparable to that of a high school student before entering college, and he needed to gain the power of the Beyonder in order to have any chance of returning back. This morning, Kyle was looking for advertisements in the newspapers for housing for his family. He read aloud one: a single-family house, with 6 rooms, 2 balconies, a private lawn and garden, a weekly rent of £1 and 6 coins. Benson stood in front of the mirror and tied his tie, talking about how this house was their goal for the future. Melissa suggested looking for budget homes at the Tingan Home Improvement Association. Benson replied that such houses are allocated for the poor. The Tingan company is better suited for them. In fact, there are some companies involved in charity, but they have strict requirements. You need to be vaccinated, clean the buildings, subletting is prohibited, littering is prohibited. Poor people cannot afford vaccinations. Such people do not have a stable source of income. They will not be able to share rent with anyone. Poor people must do everything in their power to survive. There is no more energy left for anything. Melissa was just now realizing why her friend Jenny wouldn't let her visit her after moving to the lower street. Kyle consoled her. Everything would work out, but they needed to find a new home today. The tenant led them to the Tingan Housing Improvement Company's housing project on Narcissus Street. The entrance to the residential block is connected to the living room. There is also a bay window facing the street. It will be quite bright. The living room can be used as a reception area. There is a kitchen on the right, and a large fireplace on the left. On the second floor there are 4 rooms, 2 bathrooms and a small balcony, also a storage room in the basement. The rent is 13 coins per week. In addition, there is a furnishing fee and a deposit. Kyle asked the man how much it would cost to buy the house outright. He replied that the announced price for this house was £850. Not everyone would be able to raise that amount, and besides, the company only rents houses, does not sell. Kyle was thinking hard about how to get out, because he and Benson needed to calculate their salaries, expenses for food, clothing, transportation, and the fact that there were still no mortgages in this world. The guy turned his attention to his sister standing nearby. The girl's eyes sparkled with delight. Her opinion couldn't have been more obvious. She and Benson looked at each other with the same eyes, agreeing on something. Benson approached the realtor, seriously reporting that the dining room had rather poor lighting, a very small balcony, the furnishings were shabby and outdated, and upon moving in, half the furniture would need to be replaced, especially since only one room had a fireplace. He turned to leave, thanking the tenant, Mr. Scatter, saying that his family needed someone else to look for property. Scatter ran after him in fear, promising to reduce the rent as he went. 10 minutes later the tenant gave in and the deal was sealed with a handshake. He reduced the daily rent by 12 coins, and the cost of using the furniture by 3, and the deposit would be £2. All this would be included in the contract. A gentle evening fell on the city, turning the roof of their new house purple. Kyle, wiping sweat from his brow after a long day of cleaning, thanked Benson for convincing the landlord to lower his rent. The trio stood in the large room, examining how everything had changed and become more comfortable after a thorough cleaning. Covered up to their ears in dust, their faces still shone with happiness from the work done. The weekend passed. Klein again found himself at the headquarters of the Nighthawks organization. Entering Rosanna's office, he greeted the girl. She asked if it was too hot for a guy to wear formal clothes in hot weather. He raised his bowler hat, and saluted with its style requires sacrifice, and thought to himself that it cost him £7. When asked where the captain was, Rosanna waved her hand while drinking tea in the same place as always. Having knocked on the door and received permission to enter, Kyle sat in the chair opposite the captain, who immediately asked what his employee had decided. The guy sighed, collecting his thoughts, and as he exhaled, he answered that he had chosen the seer potion for himself. Dunsmith once again warned Klein that there would be no turning back. He replied that he was aware of everything and decided to listen to his instincts. Mr. Smith called the employee to follow him. They had to go underground. Descending the stairs, Kyle asked how he would get the knowledge itself, since only the ability to learn can be taken from the potion. And where do mystical visions come from in this case? Did their predecessors really risk their lives to get them? The captain replied that one of the options is through experimentation and improving past results, The second way is when knowledge is bestowed by the gods. The third is the whisper that Klein will hear after taking potions sometimes contains pieces of mystical knowledge. People who listen to the whisper for a long time go crazy. Their notes are important materials. Kyle was surprised. Were they really like guinea pigs? And the whisper that he heard when performing the ritual to improve luck had the same effect. Both approached a large door. Mr. Smith said that this is an alchemy cabinet in which the ingredients and formulas of the seer potion are stored. Klein should go in and see how old Neil prepares the potion, because this will be the basis for the guy's studies. The man also said that the organization allowed the new guy to become an Beyonder because he would face danger and would be looking for the diary. Plus Klein had not yet contributed enough to join the main team, so the Hawks would treat him the same, the only difference being that he will learn mysticism from Old Man Neil. The brunette thought indignantly that for the most part he didn't mind. But he definitely wouldn't be happy with the fact that there was no salary increase. The captain once again remembered something forgotten. Kyle exhaled to himself that he had expected this. The man said that the organization has studied the details of the actions of the secret order, and for some time they will not dare to carry out provocations, but it is still worth being on the alert. So far the Hawks cannot confirm their involvement in the fallen aristocrats of the times of the Solomon Empire. Kyle thanked Mr. Smith, and thought that for his own safety, he should become an Beyonder as soon as possible. Finally, they entered the alchemy room. Tables were placed everywhere with objects on them, flasks, cups, books. A little further away stood a huge cauldron for brewing potions. The guy bowed in front of one of the flasks. It all reminds quite a lot of chemical laboratories in his world. At that moment, Old Man Neil greeted him. He did not expect that the newcomer would choose the seer. This requires courage, the kind that he himself possessed in his younger years. He stood by the cauldron and called Klein over to teach him how to prepare the potion. Holding a long flask in his hands, the man said that for potions that are below the 7th sequence, you just need to add the ingredients according to the formula. No additional rituals or spells need to be cast. There was an orange liquid in the flask. He began to pronounce the components of the potion out loud and pour them into the cauldron one by one. First you need to add 100 milliliters of clean water, 13 drops of night vanilla extract, then 7 leaves of golden mint, 3 drops of poisonous hemlock juice, 9 grams of young dragon blood herbs. Kyle, inhaling the emerging aroma, noted its mysticism. So far Neil has added the supporting ingredients. Adding a little less or more of one or the other will not change the final effect of the potion, but precision is important with the remaining ingredients: Lavo squid blood and star water crystal. If you add a little less than indicated, nothing will happen, but you can't add too much, this way the increase will not work. Even if you add a little more than needed, then the mind of the person who drank the potion will become distorted, and you can even die. After a while, Old Man Neil handed Klein a glass of steaming liquid. The guy hesitantly extended his hand and asked if you just need to drink the potion, and whether you need to prepare first, for example, perform a ritual or pray. Neil laughed and suggested that they start by drinking a glass of wine, or smoking a cigarette, or dancing. Of course, this was a joke. Kyle looked at his reflection in the glass. The man hurried him, because if you hesitate, the stronger the fear becomes, and the more negatively it will affect the absorption of the potion. Kyle took a deep breath, then let it out. He closed his eyes and drank the potion in quick sips. Voices began to sound in my head. Hornesis, Phlegria, Hornesis, Phlegria. Kyle doubled over from pain and strange sensations. His eyes widened. What's happening to him? Even one look at the old man seemed strange, but Neil was not surprised. He asked Klein if his vision was really unusual now, and that the guy was now hearing something he had not heard before. The guy asked in fear what he should do. Neil replied that this was due to the inability to control the power of the potion, which seeped out. It was necessary to think about the object ordinary and simple. We must focus all our attention on it, continue to do it again and again. Kyle, racked with pain, continued to try to paint a picture in his mind. Suddenly, his suffering stopped. Old Man Neil asked if the guy was feeling better. The man handed the newcomer a mirror. Now he has become a seer and an otherworldly. Kyle's eyes had yellow irises and unusual, purple pupils. Old Man Neil said that the way the pupils changed color is a sign of the powers of the potion. When the brunette learns cogitation, that is, deep meditation, the eyes will return to normal. Kyle immediately asked when he could learn this. The man replied that right now. The first step of cogitation is to imagine an object in your head, then clear your mind and replace the ordinary object with something that does not exist. Kyle presented some spheres. Neil praised him. The cogitation was going very well. He opened his eyes and the man said that he would teach him an ability called spiritual vision. You need to stretch your arms forward in front of your eyes and try to connect your index fingers. But don't let them touch and go out of sight. The guy tried it, and a small pink glow began to appear in the small distance between his fingers. The old man said that the appearance of light is the first step for spiritual vision. You need to try a few more times to get used to it. In the science of mysticism, the immaterial part of the being is divided into 4 different levels, from the central level to the outer. These are the spiritual person, the astral projection, the heart and mind body, and the etheric body. The color that Klein saw is his etheric body. The body of a healthy person will be balanced and covered in white. The head and surface of the brain will be violet. The throat and nervous system will be blue. The digestive system will be yellow. The heart and other regulatory systems will be green. The excretory system is orange. The limbs are red. If any color changes, it means that part of the body is exhausted or sick. Kyle looked at the old man and saw that besides the bright purple color around his head, all the colors were dull because he was old. Suddenly, 2 huge red cat eyes appeared behind Neil's back. Kyle reported this to Hawk in shock. He lowered his gaze and replied that there was no need to worry. This was one of the many signs of ritual magic. If spiritual vision is simply an improved version of the yin-yang eye, then do dead, inanimate objects have an intangible part? The brunette asked if the materials obtained from unusual creatures contained some life within them, even if the creature was initially dead. Neil replied that a trace of the spiritual shell remains, and that in the creation of potions this is a decisive factor, and one of the reasons why otherworldly can lose control. Klein asked that if the spirit world embraces everything, why does he feel nothing except, say, a box? To which Neil replied that being under the church of the goddess of eternal night prevents spirits from walking around in such a place. Suddenly, Kyle grabbed his head and shouted to Mr. Neil that the area around his eyebrows hurt beyond belief. Opening his eyes, the guy was stunned. Someone's transparent silhouette was floating in the air above the old man. The man calmly replied that this is normal, and becoming an otherworldly and using spiritual vision is a heavy burden on the human body. Hallucinations can even begin. A person can also be affected by his environment and the emotions of people nearby. The guy noticed that the vision disappeared just as abruptly as it appeared. With panic in his voice, he asked how he could turn off spiritual vision. Old man Neil replied that you need to close your eyes and think about the object again. Break out of the state of cogitation. You need to constantly tell yourself to stop, and then, opening your eyes, spiritual vision will disappear again. Over time, you can develop a quick way to turn off your vision, for example, like Neil himself by touching yourself twice between the eyebrows. The guy rubbed his eyes, and the man added that it would depend on personal habits and preferences. Kyle was relieved that he had gotten the hang of it. Old Hawk said that they are not sleepless, overexertion after too much practice of using spiritual vision. They need to sleep to recover. So Klein should go home and rest. And tomorrow he will need to look around the area, look for evidence regarding the diary, and only then continue lessons. Guy wearily climbed the stairs. Mr. Smith's voice was heard behind him. He said that, according to Neil, the new guy got used to cogitation and spiritual vision quite quickly. Kyle, turning pale, suggested that perhaps this was a special ability of the seer. Captain Klein warned the guy that he needed to ignore whispers and creatures that he shouldn't see, and don't even try to look at them. At home, Kyle stretched out on the bed with pleasure. He checked his pocket watch as usual, and remembered that the meeting was to take place today. After the almost mundane ritual, he again found himself in his imaginary palace, sitting at a long table, greeting Miss Justice and Mr. Hangman. A small lesson in mysticism. The spiritual body is the spiritual life of a being. Every living creature has a spiritual life. It is the most fundamental aspect of existence. Astral projection is the outer form of the spiritual body. The scenes that people see after drinking the potion are the scenes that the astral projection sees while wandering around the world. Card fortune telling, like many magic spells, involves astral projection. The heart and mind body is a complex manifestation of the ability to think rationally, analyze, sense, and remember. There are potions that focus on improving this, and there are also potions that focus entirely on it. The etheric body is a manifestation of vital energy, a physical state. The body can transmit emotions outside the body, but only to the beyonders of the same sequence as the hawks, since they have the ability to see the etheric body. Some claim that those whose vision reached its maximum would be able to see everything, everywhere, even the past and future. Audrey Watson curtsied, greeting the jester and the hangman. Kyle still could not believe that the girl trusted him so easily. He decided that he could test whether his spiritual vision was working in this place, and he put his finger to his forehead. Indeed, it worked. Justice's aura showed that the lady appeared happy and inspired. She lived up to her local name, young and lively. The hangman seemed calm, thoughtful, wary, and a little dissatisfied. Suddenly, Kyle froze when he saw the blue expanse of water near the man. Was this really an astral projection of the hangman? After all, he was a real beyonder, perhaps even much stronger than old Neil. A small talk ensued between the girl and the man. They discussed obtaining the blood of the ghostly shark, which the hangman had previously asked for. His wish was granted, and the sailor intended to tell Justice the formula of the spectator. Having fulfilled his promise, he focused on the ingredients of the potion. You could add a little, but in no case a lot. It would be better to first familiarize yourself with chemical experiments before trying to brew the potion. In addition, the name of the potion is symbolic. You need to practice cogitation in order to understand the power of the potion and master it. The jester spoke, not to master, but to assimilate, not to understand, but to act in accordance with the image, because the name of the potion is not just symbolic, it is its image. Those sitting at the table cast shocked glances at him. The hangman thought out loud, not to master, but to assimilate, not to understand, but to act. Acting is the key. When Kyle asked if everything was okay, the man thanked him, because this hint helped him understand a large number of issues. Justice asked what the fool would like to receive in return. Kyle replied that he needed help collecting the contents of Roselle Gustav's diary. Even one page would do. Algeria Wilson was amazed in his mind how this man could understand how to read what was written and why he decided that it was a diary. And Audrey directly said that Roselle's diary was written using mysterious symbols, invented by him, and no one could read it. The guy remembered the Chinese tattoos in his world, and what about the mysterious symbols? Kyle told his companions to think of a phrase and imagine them writing it in a hurry, then pick up a pen and start writing. Justice nodded and gasped as the journal and pen were suddenly in her hands, and the pen really began to move across the paper, drawing those very incomprehensible symbols. Moreover, on its own. The girl asked in surprise if the jester reads their thoughts. But he waved his hands. He simply guides and simplifies the process. If they do not wish, nothing will appear, so you just need to remember the symbols in the diary to show them to him. Hangman convinced Miss Justice that she didn't need to worry because her memory would improve after taking the potion. But we must remember that for the spectator the world should not be anything more than a theater stage. Only observed objectively from the outside, she will be able to understand people's true thoughts. Kyle began to think that the spectator to some extent requires a person to become an objective and neutral participant in the audience. Maybe this is the action to which Emperor Roselle was referring. Then Kyle himself should act in accordance with the image of the seer. Audrey turned to the jester, saying that she would try her best to collect as many pieces of Emperor Roselle's diary as possible. He replied that 2 pages of the diary from each would be enough. But if there was more material, he would double the fee. The guy caustically thought that the additional payment would come from these very pages of the diary. Thus they would form a mutually beneficial circle. He told the companions that now they could simply discuss what was happening around them. For example, that news had surfaced that a secret order had lost the diary that once belonged to the Antigonus family. The hangman perked up at the mention of the Antigones, wondering how the Church of the Goddess of Eternal Night would react upon hearing this news. Audrey asked why the man asked this, and why the church should react in a special way. Algeria replied that the Antigonus family was destroyed by the Church of the Goddess somewhere at the end of the 4th era. Kyle realized with shock that in this case, the diary was much more important to the Hawks than he had thought, and the main reason they allowed him to become a Beyonder was because they wanted Klein's help in finding the diary. Audrey said that after the defeat in the battle on the east coast of Balam, the king and the prime minister are under tremendous stress. They think that the government is too chaotically structured. As soon as the ruling party changes, a huge number of personnel working in the government also change. Kyle did not understand why Emperor Roselle did not invent the civil service system. but he himself said that there was a simple solution: holding examinations that were open to every member of society. Administrative posts in the government could be given to those outstanding individuals who passed the examinations. Political posts will be given to the party that wins the elections. Examinations will be held for 1 to 3 years. Personnel will be replaced so that the kingdom will be able to continue to function effectively. Justice clenched her fists joyfully, exclaiming that this could work, and the jester must have a lot of life experience and outstanding wisdom. Kyle smiled at this statement, and thought that if Justice could successfully push this idea, he could have Benson take the exams, and even find out Justice's true identity. At this point, the jester suggested ending the meeting. Kyle lay back in his bed and reflected that it still felt quite strange to enter and leave the gray space, and how his astral projection wandered around the spirit world, but now he had enough extra power to touch the other crimson stars. Looking at the back of his hand, which had 4 dots on it, he wondered if he should try to summon another person. Potion Formula 9 of the Spectator Sequence: 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 15 grams of crushed cow tooth, 7 elven flower petals, 1 eyeball of an adult manhwa fish, 35 milliliters of blood of a black ibex fish. The last 2 ingredients are obtained from unusual creatures that live in the sea. The ingredients must be added in order, and remember about assimilation and action. Once in her room, Audrey enthusiastically grabbed her face with her hands. This is incredible. It's all for real. She must quickly write down the formula of the Spectator, otherwise she will forget. She will look for the ingredients in the storehouses and treasuries of her family, and what she does not find, she will try to acquire. The girl ran her fingers along the spines of the books on the shelf. Even if the potion didn't work, she would have to wait for the next meeting and ask Mr. Jester and Mr. Hangman for help. Her beloved dog Susie appeared in the doorway. Miss Watson patted her friend on the shaggy top of her head and said that in the book she had read, the detective was always accompanied by a reliable and capable assistant, and after the girl becomes a spectator, she will definitely need the help of a big dog. Alger Wilson sat at the table and wrote something with a pen on a piece of paper. He thought that everything that was happening was natural, but it was difficult to understand some of the details. The man prepared as best he could, but was unable to find out who this mysterious jester was. Kyle walked along the sidewalk, leaning on his cane, and thought that the captain and the others had conducted a thorough search of the Welch estate, so he would not be able to find any leads to the diary. Raising his head, Kyle's gaze came across a sign that said Fortune Teller Club. Perhaps here he can learn to act as a seer. In the room he was met by a smiling secretary, Angelica, and asked if Sir had come to find out his fate or join the club, to which the guy, embarrassed by such pressure, clarified what the requirements for joining were. The girl replied that it was necessary to fill out paperwork and pay £5 as a membership fee, then £1 every year, because members could, if they wished, use local equipment, enjoy free tea, go to lectures, and buy food at low prices. The brunette realized that he did not have that kind of money, and decided to try the first option to find out his fate. Angelica handed the guest a list of names of participants who provide fortune-telling services, and prices were also indicated there. Having carefully looked through the list, Kyle first saw the name of the famous fortune-teller from Tingen, Haynes Vincent, but he couldn't afford it, so he chose a cheaper specialist, Mr. Glycis, which he told the secretary. She frowned slightly and warned that he was considered a newbie, but the guy reassured her and replied that he took full responsibility for his own decision. The girl led the client down the corridor and knocked on the fortune-teller's office, introducing the guest. The man asked in surprise whether he had really been chosen. Angelica nodded and asked which room Glycis would like to use for fortune-telling. He answered that it was Topaz. The fortune-teller and the client were sitting at the table. Glycis honestly admitted that fortune-telling was his hobby, and offered to conduct a free session, and he himself would cover the club's commission. Kyle replied that he appreciated his honesty. Kyle activated his spiritual vision in one motion and told the man that he had a decent and well-paid job. Then he saw the light fortune-tellers. They clearly did not look healthy. Glycis, noticing the same movement of the client, decided that he had a headache, and offered to tell fortunes about his health. The guy agreed, but insisted on telling fortunes about the location of the object. The fortune-teller asked to calm the mind and concentrate thoughts on this item, then slowly repeat to yourself the phrase "it can still be found," and at the same time shuffled the deck of cards. Kyle asked himself, shuffling the cards, if he could find the Antigone family diary. Glycis continued that he needed to turn the deck so that it lay vertically, then reveal the top card. If the image is upside down, then the item will not be found. If the image is the right side, then he will continue to guess at the specific location of the item. The card that fell out turned out to be a jester. What a coincidence. Because according to the hangman, fortune-telling is a tool that interprets the results of communication between a person's innate spirituality and the spiritual world. No matter what exactly fortune-telling is done, it does not affect the results. Glycis apologized for the wrong card. Then Kyle asked if it was possible to tell fortunes whether this item fell into the hands of someone else. The man answered in the affirmative. You just need to do the same thing from the very beginning. Another time a star fell out. It seems that no one has discovered this object yet. The guy handed over 2 coins. The fortune teller was surprised. He said that the session was free. On the way out, Kyle replied that this was a sign of respect that fortune-telling deserves, and Glycis thanked him for his generosity. Finally, the guy advised the fortune-teller to get checked by a doctor and pay special attention to his lungs. Glycis smiled awkwardly. His client did not look like a doctor. Was this really a joke? The next day Kyle went to Blackthorn. In the reception office, Leonard appeared in Roseanne's place, which surprised Kyle. The guy sat with his cheek resting on his palm and said that Rosanna had a shift in the armory, and added that there was something that had always puzzled him. Smirking, Leonard bowed his head and asked why Welch and Nia committed suicide on the spot while Klein went home first. He replied that perhaps it was because an unknown entity wanted him to hide the diary somewhere, to which Leonard rose from the table and asked why this entity did not force the company to destroy the diary. But Kyle didn't know whether it was hidden or destroyed. Perhaps this creature likes human sacrifice, and it wanted to repeat this. That's why it forced the guy to take the diary, and the failure of his suicide was accidental. Leonard said that this was a good explanation. Perhaps the diary could create evil, and with the help of Welch and Nia's blood, it could begin to grow. He continued to reason that this creature decided to take Klein away because it was worried that the Hawks would be able to stop him before evil was born. Of course, it is possible that the diary was destroyed to hide its contents, or to hide the origin of evil, in which case, this is a sufficient explanation for the failed suicide. Kyle was surprised that he was suspected. Maybe Leonard even thinks that Klein's body was used to awaken evil, or assumes that Kyle himself is a victim. The guy said out loud that he doesn't remember what happened, so he can't defend himself, but the captain and others confirmed that there is nothing wrong with him. Leonard sat back in the chair and folded his arms across his chest. He was simply interested in various options. There is a possibility that an unknown entity failed, and regarding the failure of Klein's suicide, he must believe that the goddess always protects people and looks after them. Kyle turned to leave when Leonard asked about the purpose of his visit, answering that he came to get bullets from the armory to practice shooting. Leonard looked after the newcomer in disbelief. Finally, after 7 hours, Kyle finished his workout. Thinking that he would need to buy food, he went into the house and met his sister on the threshold. The girl was holding bags of food in her hands. She knew that the brothers would come late, so she went to the store, taking money from her stash. Kyle asked if she was at school, and why she didn't take the cart. Melissa sternly said that the trip to and from school is expensive, and if you add up the whole family's trips, it comes out to the amount equivalent to renting their house, and she also finds broken things along the way while walking. Kyle put his hand forward conciliatorily, answering that they could afford such expenses even if they dined on meat every day. Melissa stomped her foot. You have to take into account that an accident can always happen. The brother told the sister that she could use the time spent on the road to study, because the girl needs to study, find a good job, and then she will no longer worry about money. The next morning, Melissa announced that she was going to school and said goodbye to Klein. He called out to her and recalled their conversation yesterday. The girl, puffing out her cheeks, meekly agreed that she would take the cart. Kyle went to work and immediately visited Old Man Neil, who greeted the guy and asked if he had heard whispers at night. Kyle smiled, sitting down, and shook his head, answering that he was fast asleep. The old man consoled him that hearing voices was not so easy, and suggested that he continue their lessons in mysticism. The old man had a silver pendant on a long chain in his hand, and said that before starting his lessons, he would teach Klein an interesting trick. When the guy asked which one exactly, Neil replied that while he was going to go around the armory, storage room and archive, let Klein make 2 cups of coffee, put something bad in one of them. It could be anything. But the main thing is not to spend too much coffee because the old man makes it himself from high-quality beans. The brunette leaned over the cups and wondered what he should add to one. After some time, the man returned. Klein managed to complete the task. The old man, without further ado, began moving the amulet over the drinks. Above one of them, the amulet twitched jaggedly. Neil immediately announced the verdict in front of the surprised guy: this cup was something bad inside. The brunette exclaimed in amazement that the prediction was incredibly accurate, perhaps because of the moonstone in the amulet. Hawk explained that what he was doing was called pendulum dowsing, sometimes also called spiritual dowsing, and used to predict good and bad things. When both sat down in the chairs, Neil said that counterclockwise movement implies bad, clockwise movement means good. If the pendulum does not move, then the object is neither bad nor good. Then he suggested writing something on a piece of paper, but not a question. Kyle clarified that, in other words, the sentence should not be vague. The man replied in the affirmative. You cannot write "Does she want to be my bride?" Instead you need to write "She wants to be my bride." Counterclockwise movement means no, and clockwise yes. The guy decided to rather save money in order to buy the items necessary for spiritual climbing. The old man said that this was a standard procedure for the otherworldly. They do not always get a raise in salary, so this should be compensated for by other opportunities and amenities. To which Kyle replied that he would go to the captain and apply for such a pendulum. Neil asked, taking a sip of coffee, what the guy put there. He, without having time to warn the man in advance, quietly answered that there was some dirt from his shoes because of the similarity to coffee. Neil spat out the liquid that he almost swallowed and asked to pour out the rest. Brief instructions on the looping pendulum. This pendulum is also called a spiritual looping pendulum, based on the connection of astral projection with the spiritual world and the cosmos, the ability of natural stones and metals to communicate with the spiritual world. You need to put your hand straight and adjust the length of the pendulum so that it almost touches the object. Close your eyes, focus on the object, then open your eyes and see if the pendulum is moving. If not, repeat the process until the pendulum starts to move. Finally, they were ready to begin the lesson of mysticism. As the old man explained, one of the foundations of the mysticism is symbolism, and asked if Klein knew what it was. The guy thought about it, and replied that symbolism is outside the spiritual world. This feeling cannot be described by relying on the 5 senses. These are revelations and experiences that are difficult or even impossible to describe in words. They appear as abstract symbols or images and have many types and meanings. The old man praised the knowledge of the newcomer, and said that only after he had mastered symbolism would he be able to say that he had taken the path of mysticism. The images that Klein sees on tarot cards were created by man to interpret genuine revelations. The man showed some symbol on the paper and asked its meaning. It was a symbol of the constellation of an unprecedented harvest, similar to a stick with 3 branches at the bottom. Cade thought that the name of the constellation was so simple, it sounded tasteless and old-fashioned. Neil added that the Emperor thought the same. He wanted to change the names of the constellations to Virgo, Cancer, Scorpio, and so on, but unfortunately Roselle was not able to cope with the force of tradition. Further conditions of the lesson greatly undermined Kyle's morale. It was necessary to learn the selection of spells, the creation of a crystal ball, how to draw an astrolabe for predictions. Finally, at the end of the lesson, the old man asked the guy to think about what he had learned and apply the knowledge where he could. This was the only way to intuitively use knowledge. Also, the newbie should practice cognition every day, revealing secrets and eliminating bad consequences. Klein talked about how, with the help of his new status, he should make predictions for other people more often in order to improve, and also about plans to join a fortune-telling club when he has extra money in order to become a real seer. Neil replied that the guy's ideas were similar to those of Daly. She continued to say that you need to be a real visionary, but you don't need to use your own savings when you can ask the captain to pay. While Kyle was surprised that he could just ask, the old man continued to say that it was easy to meet cultists and heretics in fortune-telling clubs. If he joined there as an employee of the Nighthawks, then it would become much easier to keep track of them. When the man, with irony in his voice, asked if the new guy was ready to pay his money, Kyle sharply replied that he would definitely ask his superiors for it. Mr. Smith studied the list of demands, a spiritual pendulum, payment of the membership fee for the fortune-telling club in the Northern District. The man asked with a smile whether old Neil had advised his subordinate, and he nodded. The captain signed the petition. He was just about to apply for funding from July to September, and Klein could pick up the spiritual pendulum this afternoon. When asked that it was already July, and maybe he should have applied for July funding in June, Dunn, in his usual manner, replied that he simply forgot because he was busy. Meanwhile, Audrey Watson circled around various bottles and flasks. She completed the potion on the first try, obvious talent. Fearing failure, the girl prepared twice as many ingredients. Now she just needed to drink it and become a spectator. Susie jumped up from her seat and ran to the door. Audrey looked out of the room with interest. It was a maid. The girl gently but strictly asked her not to disturb her while conducting chemical experiments. The dog looked with delight at the mysterious liquid in the flask while the maid told her mistress about the invitation to a lunchtime tea party from the Duchess. But Audrey asked her to tell her mother that she had a headache, and let her apologize to Duchess Dell. The girl kept trying to dissuade the surprised maid from helping her return to the room. Then she made sure that the maid left the corridor and did not interfere with her taking the potion. But, returning to the laboratory, she froze for a second at the door, and then ran to the table. Audrey completely forgot that Susie can open doors with handles. The ship containing Alger Wilson was rocking smoothly on the waves. His assistant was in the process of persuading the man to return to the kingdom and become a captain of the Punishers or even a bishop. He did not understand why Algeria instead went to sea and became the captain of the Blue Avenger. Wilson thoughtfully replied that the sea is full of storms. This is the kingdom of the Lord, and he is ready to follow his will, also ready to patrol the territory of his kingdom for him. Deputy Sains said he understood and wished the captain good luck, but he, looking at the endless ocean, thought that the assistant would not understand, because he knew nothing. Audrey Watson solemnly raised the flask with the new potion. It was a mistake that Susie drank the previous batch. Fortunately, everything was now under control. The girl resolutely bent over the potion. Then, with a sharp movement closing her eyes, she drank the entire contents of the flask. Security Bureau Ternovnik, reception. It was raining outside, the room was warm. Kyle, taking cookies from a plate, read in the newspaper that the criminals who killed Mr. Welch and Miss Naya had been arrested. Welch's father, Mr. McGovern, a banker, held a magnificent funeral for his son in the city of Constant. Apparently, the guy thought, the man's father believed the words of the police and did not conduct a personal investigation. Roseanne, taking a sip of tea, said that today there is only one of the Nighthawks in the organization, because a case has surfaced that may involve cultists in the Golden Hindu area. The police have asked corpse collector Frey and Sleepless Faden to go there and help them. There was a knock on the door, the girl opened it, and a stranger stood on the threshold, soaked to the skin, despite the umbrella in his hand. From the doorway he asked if they were the people who are called mercenaries. Rosanna nodded, and then the man immediately offered a job. The secretary replied that all the civilians were busy and would return no earlier than in an hour. But the stranger was not going to leave. He asked to wait for the employees here. The girl could not refuse him and invited him to enter. Leonard entered the room and was surprised by the appearance of an unexpected guest. Rosanna reacted quickly and said that the man sitting was a client. She asked Leonard if the captain had returned, to which the stranger was surprised, because no one else had come. She quickly explained that as a security company, they have more doors than meets the eye. Leonard immediately smiled, introduced himself, and asked what kind of work awaited them. The stranger's name was Clee. He was the butler of Mr. Vickroy, the tobacconist. His only son, Elliot, was kidnapped this morning. They told the police about it. But the gentleman wants to get help from the security company. This is the guarantee of saving his son. After finding the child, Vickroy will pay £100. And if he is saved, then 200, to which Leonard skeptically asked why a tobacco merchant with close trading relations with southern plantations only had £200. The butler replied that everything was different. Mr. Vickroy was an ordinary businessman and not so wealthy. He believed that the police were not very suitable for rescuing hostages. Leonard snapped his finger and ordered the secretary to bring the contract to sign. Rosanna exhaled irritably at this. Stop thinking of yourself as a poet. A little later, the girl handed Mr. Clee the contract. He thanked him and replied that he would wait for good news. Leonard immediately asked Klein for help. He quietly told the guy that he himself was good at fighting, shooting, climbing, feeling things and communicating, but he didn't know how to look for people, and it was a pity to send old Neil to work in such weather. Klein thought he could use this opportunity to work on his abilities, wondering how useful they might be. Leonard asked if he needed anything from the client. He replied that Elliot's unwashed clothes and accessories that he was wearing would also do. The client offered a photograph of a boy, and did not understand why other items were needed, but Leonard assured him that his colleague had a pet with a good sense of smell, which is why things with Elliot's scent were needed, but the photograph would also come in handy. Klein and Leonard got into the carriage that drove up to the building. Klein was holding Elliot's photo in his hands. He already had the child's clothes and the storm amulet with him. Leonard remembered the client talking about 3 kidnappers who looked ordinary, but all 3 were armed. Then the poet asked the new guy where they were going. He asked to wait and decided to try dowsing with a pole. He placed the boy's clothes on the floor of the carriage and placed the pole on top with an amulet tied around it. After letting go of the pole, Kyle kept repeating the same statement in his head, Elliot's whereabouts. Finally, the pole itself pointed in the direction in which they were already traveling. The guy ordered the coachman to drive quickly and straight, without turning. Finally, they arrived at the abandoned building they needed. The small team quickly climbed up the stairs. The pole with the amulet pointed to a specific door where Elliot was supposed to be. Kyle activated his spiritual vision and counted those in the room: 3 kidnappers and 1 hostage, a person with the weakest aura. Elliot, Mr. Klee said that they had 2 weapons and 1 revolver. Suddenly Leonard came forward and started saying strange things. Why did they become kidnappers? Why shouldn't they be civilized people? Then he started singing. Ah, the thunderstorm of horror, the hope of bloody screams. At least one thing is true, life will fly by in an instant. One thing is true and the rest are lies. The flower that blooms will die forever. Kyle felt his eyelids droop, as if he were being watched by the indifferent gaze of an invisible mystery. He was pulled out of his oblivion by a loud sound in Leonard's voice. He sang on purpose so that the bandits would fall asleep. Carefully opening the door, Leonard and Kyle looked inside. After making sure the room was quiet, they entered. There, indeed, 3 kidnappers were fast asleep in various positions, and a child lay tied up nearby. It was clearly the kidnapped little Elliot, Mr. Vicroy's son. Kyle, looking at the boy, heard footsteps behind him. He turned sharply, holding out his gun, and ordered the stranger with bags of food in his hands not to move. He dropped the bag on the floor, raised his hands up and tried to justify himself, stepping back. The next moment he rushed down the stairs. Kyle calmly pointed the gun at him. 1 shot and a bullet pierced the criminal's shoulder. Leonard appeared and shouted that he had missed one. He leaned forward sharply, jumping upward in an unimaginable manner, and the next moment he landed right on the back of the wounded kidnapper. He screamed in pain and collapsed on the floor. With a thumbs up, Leonard praised Kyle's shot, who awkwardly began to justify that he was aiming for the leg. Now that everything is over, it's time to take little Elliot away. Leonard removed the ropes from the sleepy boy. He finally woke up and asked who his saviors were. The man replied that they were mercenaries sent by the boy's father. Soon he would be able to see him. They would leave the rest to the police. Sitting in the carriage that was taking them back to the organization, Kyle and Leonard high-fived each other. Leonard admitted that he sometimes envies Beyonders like old man Neil, and while doing this work, he noticed that he was jealous of Kyle too, who asked if they could use fortune-telling in their work, since it was not so difficult, but Leonard wasn't sure. The newcomer realized that they needed to warn Mr. Klee, because if he thought that Elliot was saved by the police, the mercenaries would only receive 50% of the amount. The poet threw up his hands at this. For people like them, money is not an important thing. Kyle thought that for him it was certainly very important. Elliot won't lie. Besides, Kyle, not being a real Nighthawk, will receive only 10% of the amount, because, following the rules, half must be given to the organization, and the rest is divided between the participants in the operation. The guy muttered that these percentages are not so bad. Finally, night fell and the moon shone brightly over the Moretti family home. Kyle, who had fallen asleep, was woken up by something. He realized that the sound was coming from another room, stood up and pulled the door handle. There was a diary on the table, and from its pages the jester looked mockingly at the guy. Everyone will die, including me. The brunette stared in horror at the discovery. The jester's smile seemed to become even wider, turning into a grin. Kyle sat up abruptly in bed, breathing restlessly and clutching the blanket. It was just a dream, but why was it like this? What was he trying to tell him? But what he experienced when Leonard sang was not like the sensations of cogitation or spiritual vision, more like déjà vu, the diary of the Antigonus family. Rising out of bed, the thought ran through Kyle's head that the diary could be in the kidnapper's room. He must urgently find the captain. Later, breaking into the organization's building, he came across Leonard, who, when asked where the captain was, replied that he was in his office. Kyle did not waste time on pleasantries, but quickly ran to the desired office, past the poet. Bursting into the office, Kyle shouted to Mr. Smith from the threshold that he had experienced strong déjà vu, and that he was sure that the Antigonus family diary was the cause. He quickly said that he had not realized this in the room with the kidnappers, but only realized it last night when he received a revelation in a dream. Leonard appeared behind him and said that he missed something important yesterday. The captain gave the order to visit Old Man Neil, then Fry, and let Kenley go guard the armory while the rest went to the abandoned house. Some time later, a team of Nighthawks stood at the door where the kidnapped child was being held. Kyle said that until he had the dream, he did not realize that the diary could be there. Fry, the corpse collector, noted that he did not sense evil spirits. The captain standing nearby confirmed that there was no one inside, because there was no spiritual glow that would serve as an indicator of the presence of magic. Leonard smiled wickedly upon hearing this. The next moment, he simply kicked down the door under Kyle's shocked gaze. What awaited them inside made the guy freeze in horror. In the chair opposite, lounging, sat a woman who had long since died, so long ago that corpse worms were crawling into the empty eye sockets and across the face. Kyle turned away, trying to suppress the urge to vomit, but Fry calmly handed him a box of ointment, advising him to inhale the smell. Mr. Smith ordered Leonard to find local police patrolling the area to find out as much as possible about the situation. Then the captain asked Fry to examine the body. The man asked Klein if this place felt familiar, and he became thoughtful. He felt as if he had already been here. His head was filled with otherworldly whispers. Activating his spiritual vision, the brunette confirmed his guess. He assumed that the whisper was telling him about the same Hornesis that the past Klein wrote about in his diary. Fry concluded after examination that the woman had been dead for more than 5 days, without injuries, but there were no obvious signs that the Beyonder had killed her. To find out the cause of death, a more detailed examination was needed. The captain agreed with him. Kyle could not say anything more, but Neil, upon entering the room, felt a certain force that sealed this door, the same one that is used in ritual magic. Leonard, jumping out of the next room, stated that the name of the deceased was Katie Stephania Bieber. She was approximately 55 to 60 years old, a widow, lived with her son, Ray Bieber, for more than 10 years. He is now about 30 years old, inherited his father's trade, works as a jeweler, salary is about £1.15 a week. According to neighbors, he has not been seen for more than a week. Kyle thought that since the diary was not here, and Ray Bieber was missing, then there was a good chance that the diary was with him. Dunn Smith asked Old Man Neil to find out what Ray looked like. The old man, closing his eyes and concentrating, asked the goddess for strength in a low voice, as they sought protection from the night. Suddenly he opened his eyes, they were dark as night. Grabbing a pen lying on the table and dipping it in ink, he began to draw a portrait, and immediately described what he saw from the outside: black hair, blue eyes. He also has a ceramic tooth on the left side of his mouth. The Hawks returned to their place. Old Neil entered the office with the words that their mission was completed, now done, and the others must file an arrest warrant for Ray Bieber using a portrait. Kyle, closing the door, hesitantly asked why he took the Antigonus family diary and brought it to the Bieber house. Neil wearily sank into a chair and replied that Klein had provoked a creature that he should not have, and the goal was to deliver the diary into the hands of Ray Bieber. Then the man pointed his index finger at the surprised Klein and said that the creature had chosen him to remove the evidence. It decided to kill Naya and Welch back at the estate, but it was still unclear, until today, how Klein managed to survive. The guy sat down next to him and said that he still didn't understand his action, while Neil suggested that Ray's life path met the creature's requirements, or that he was one of the descendants of the Antigonus family. The old man tiredly rubbed the bridge of his nose. By the end of the day, Bieber already had the diary in his hands. Moreover, the case will soon be solved. News of Ray's arrest will reach the secret order. The fact that Kyle survived will also play a role, but it's better not to stick his head out so as not to attract attention. Slapping his sides, The old man congratulated Klein, because he would soon go to a new part of his life, filled with sunshine, and besides, the guy was very lucky. Almost immediately after joining, he got a job worth £200. Kyle worriedly asked if the man had enough money and how much he received per week. He replied that £12 without paying tax was a lot for the Beyonders, but it was never enough. For example, performing a ritual takes a lot of materials. There is a limit on how the organization can provide free resources, and the rest of the materials need to be purchased on the black market or in other places. Kyle was surprised that this kind of market was not prohibited by the church, and asked Mr. Neal to take him with him to practice as a seer. Neal was embarrassed and replied that it was easier to ban in words, and he also detained £30 there, and now rarely appears on the market. Scratching his head, the man complained about his old age and said that he needed to rest, then asked Kyle to analyze today's events before tomorrow's lesson in the basics of ritual magic. The guy remembered that with the £10 he received for saving Elliot, he would be able to join the fortune-telling club. Having completed the documents, the secretary solemnly congratulated the guy on joining the club, and gave him a receipt and a cufflink. These will serve as confirmation of participation. The guy looked at the cufflink, then asked if he could make predictions. Angelica replied that she could. As a member of the club, Kyle could also feel in any classes held here. Now the popular fortune-teller Hannes Vincent is giving a lecture. If the guy is interested, he can go and listen.